Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The galaxy stretched infinitely, dotted with stars that flickered like distant fires in the night. In the uncharted depths of space, on a forgotten planet, an ancient temple slumbered, hidden beneath layers of dust and time. The winds howled across the barren landscape, carrying whispers of secrets lost to the universe. Deep inside the temple, Professor Enron Voss, a seasoned galactic archaeologist, worked feverishly. His breathing was heavy, the air thick with tension as his hands brushed away the final grains of sand covering the mysterious object. Enron's eyes widened as the ancient glyphs on the walls illuminated faintly, reacting to his presence. He didn't need a translator to understand their meaning. The symbols spoke of an ancient power, a relic from a civilization long forgotten, capable of destruction on a cosmic scale. His heart raced, knowing that he had uncovered something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. This artifact was not just a relic of Historia, it was a weapon, one that could annihilate the universe. The flickering lights in the temple grew stronger, and a sharp hum pierced the air. Enron hurried to activate his communicator, hands trembling as he sent a coded message back to his research ship. But before he could finish, a shadow moved in the corner of his eye. He barely had time to turn before the room erupted in chaos. His ship, hovering in orbit above the planet, was under attack. The archaeologist's desperate cry for help was cut short, leaving the transmission incomplete. Enron Voss had found the artifact, but he wouldn't live to tell the tale. Far across the galaxy, in a hidden base on a desolate moon, the Avengers stood around a holographic display. The fragmented transmission from Enron played in a loop, his final words repeating over and over, "The artifact a broken bar, it can destroy everything a broken bar. We can't let this happen," said Captain Orion, his voice steady but filled with urgency. He was a seasoned leader, known for his ability to remain calm in the face of universal threats. If what this man found is as dangerous as it sounds, the entire galaxy is at risk. Beside him, Celia, a telepath with the ability to sense the emotions of others, closed her eyes and concentrated on the faint echoes left in the transmission. "I can feel his fear. This isn't just about ancient technology, it's something far more dangerous." Someone else was there. Someone powerful. Orion nodded, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. "We need to move quickly. Whoever attacked Enron is probably after the same thing, and if they get their hands on that artifact, we might not have much time." "Where do we start?" asked Derek, the team's tech genius. His cybernetic enhancements allowed him to interface with any system, making him indispensable on missions like this. He tapped a few commands into his wrist console, bringing up a star map. The signal originated from the Cairn system. It's remote, barely charted. If Enron's last transmission came from there, it's likely where the artifact was hidden. "Then we start there," Orion said. "This isn't just another mission. If we fail, there won't be a galaxy left to save." The Cairn system was as desolate as it was ancient. The Avengers' sleek starship, the Argentum, glided through the void, its engines humming softly. The planet below was cold and lifeless, with jagged mountain ranges cutting across the landscape like scars. The landing was smooth, but the weight of the mission pressed heavily on everyone aboard. Orion led the team out of the ship, the wind biting at their faces as they made their way toward the temple ruins. "Stay alert," he warned. "We don't know what else might be here." As they entered the ancient structure, Tarek activated his scanner, the device emitting a soft hum as it searched for traces of technology or energy signatures. "I'm picking up something, a broken bar. It's faint, but it's definitely not natural." This way. The team moved deeper into the temple, the air thick with the musty scent of decay. The walls were lined with more of the glowing glyphs, their meaning long forgotten by the galaxy at large. Celia paused, her eyes narrowing as she reached out with her mind. "Something's wrong. I can feel the presence of an Athra broken bar. It's distant, but watching." Before they could react, the room exploded into chaos. Figures clad in dark armor emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. These were no ordinary mercenaries. They moved with precision, their strikes coordinated and deadly. The Harbinger's agents had arrived. "Take cover!" Orion shouted as the Avengers sprang into action. Energy bolts flew across the chamber as the two sides clashed. Tarek hacked into the temple's systems, activating ancient defenses to create barriers between them and the enemy. Celia unleashed a wave of psychic energy, sending one of the attackers crashing into the wall. Orion, his reflexes honed from years of battle, dodged a barrage of fire before delivering a powerful blow to one of the agents. The fight was brutal, but the Avengers were outnumbered. They needed a way out fast. "We've got what we came for," Tarek called out, his scanner lighting up as it detected the artifact's energy signature nearby. "But we can't fight them all off and retrieve it at the same time." "We don't have to," Orion replied, his mind racing. "Tarek, get the coordinates and send them to the ship." "Celia, cover us. We're pulling out." As Tarek uploaded the data, Celia's psychic shield deflected a series of energy blasts. The Avengers retreated, heading back to their ship under heavy fire. They barely made it to the Argentum before the mercenaries closed in. "That was too close," Tarek muttered, breathing heavily as he collapsed into the pilot's seat. "We need to find out who's pulling their strings." Orion nodded grimly. "We already know. It's the Harbinger. He's after the artifact too, and now that he knows we're looking for it, he'll stop at nothing to get to it first." Back aboard the Argentum, the team reviewed the data Tarek had gathered. The artifact had been scattered across multiple dimensions, each piece hidden in a different realm to prevent it from being reassembled. "This is worse than we thought," Celia said, her voice quiet. "The artifact is a weapon of destruction, but it's also connected to the very fabric of the universe. If the Harbinger gets all the pieces a broken bar." "He won't," Orion interrupted, his tone firm. "We'll stop him. We'll split up and retrieve the pieces before he does." The mission was clear, but the risks were enormous. Each dimension they would enter held its own dangers, and the Harbinger was never far behind. Still, they had no choice. The fate of the universe depended on them. The first dimension they targeted was a realm of pure energy, a place where time and space twisted and warped beyond comprehension. The Avengers had never encountered anything like it. The landscape shifted constantly, a kaleidoscope of light and sound that disoriented the senses. But deep within this chaotic realm was the first fragment of the artifact. As they ventured deeper into the dimension, the team encountered strange, ethereal beings. Their forms shimmered like liquid light, and they communicated not with words, but with thoughts and emotions. Celia took the lead, using her telepathic abilities to communicate with them. "They're the guardians of this dimension," she explained. "They're willing to help us, but they want something in return, a trial of sorts. We have to prove our worth." "What kind of trial?" Orion asked, his brow furrowing. "One that tests not just our physical strength, but our unity as a team. They want to see if we can overcome our fears, doubts, and weaknesses together." The trial was unlike anything the Avengers had faced before. Each member was confronted with their deepest insecurities, forced to confront the shadows of their past and the fears that lurked within their hearts. For Orion, it was the weight of leadership and the fear that he would fail those who depended on him. For Celia, it was the fear of losing control over her powers and hurting those she cared about. Tarek was haunted by the idea that his reliance on technology made him less human, a tool rather than a person. But together, they faced their fears, supporting one another as they navigated the mental and emotional gauntlet. The Guardians watched in silence, their forms pulsing with approval as the Avengers emerged from the trial stronger and more united than before. When they finally reached the fragment of the artifact, they were met with an unexpected surprise. The Harbinger's agents had already arrived. A battle erupted once more, but this time, the Avengers were prepared. They fought with renewed strength and determination, knowing that the fate of the universe hung in the balance. Just as they secured the fragment, the dimension began to collapse. The Harbinger's agents had activated a device that destabilized the realm, and the entire dimension was unraveling. The Avengers barely escaped through a portal, the fragments safely in their possession, but the cost was high. The collapse of the dimension had weakened the very fabric of reality. The Argentum drifted through space as the team regrouped. They had the first piece of the artifact, but the Harbinger was closing in, and the stakes were higher than ever. "We're running out of time," Orion said, his gaze fixed on the stars. "We need to find the remaining fragments before the Harbinger does, or there won't be a universe left to save." The team's victory over the Harbinger's agents was short-lived. Back aboard the Argentum, the atmosphere felt thick with tension, the weight of their mission pressing down on them harder than ever before. As the ship drifted through the silence of space, Orion stood at the front of the command deck, his eyes fixed on the stars. The fragment of the artifact they had secured pulsed faintly in the containment unit, a reminder of how close they were to either saving or losing everything. Tarek's fingers danced across the control panel, scanning the data they'd gathered from the dimension they had barely escaped. "We're not going to get a second chance," he muttered, his voice edged with exhaustion. "The Harbinger's agents are already destabilizing the dimensions. They know we're collecting the fragments, and they're speeding things up." Orion turned to face the rest of the team, his face unreadable, but his voice steady. "Then we don't have any time to waste. Where's the next fragment?" Tarek glanced at his screen, inputting a series of coordinates. "The next dimension ICE or broken bar strange. It's a pocket universe, self-contained. The laws of physics are warped, but a broken bar. This is the last piece we need before we confront the Harbinger." Celia, who had been sitting quietly, her eyes closed as she processed the overwhelming emotions of the team, opened her eyes and spoke. "We're all exhausted. The Harbinger isn't just out there, he's inside each of our minds. He's pushing us to the edge." Orion nodded, knowing she was right. They were being tested, worn down, piece by piece. But the universe didn't care about their fatigue. The Harbinger didn't care about their doubts. All that mattered was stopping him. The Argentum shifted into hyperdrive, the stars outside the windows blurring as they sped toward their next destination. The pocket universe that held the final fragment was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was a world of endless twilight, where gravity pulled in strange directions and the sky was a swirling vortex of stars and shadow. As they disembarked, the ground beneath their feet felt insubstantial, as if they were walking on a dream. Tarek's sensors were already going haywire. "This place is a mess," he said, trying to adjust his equipment. "Reality itself is unstable here." Orion's jaw tightened. "Then we need to move fast." The team pressed on, navigating the twisted landscape. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, and every step felt like it took them in multiple directions at once. It wasn't long before they realized they weren't alone. Figures materialized from the shadows, wraith-like creatures, their forms flickering as if they weren't fully anchored to this plane of existence. They moved silently, but their intent was clear: to stop the Avengers from reaching the fragment. Orion drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the shifting landscape. "Stay close," he ordered. "They're not real, but they can still hurt us." The battle was unlike anything they had faced before. The Wraiths didn't fight with traditional weapons, they manipulated the environment, warping space and gravity to disorient and attack. The Avengers fought back, their movements precise and coordinated, but the Wraiths seemed endless, their forms regenerating even after being struck down. Celia, using her telepathic abilities, pushed back against the Wraith's mental assault, but even she was struggling. "They're feeding off our doubts," she shouted over the chaos. "We have to focus, or they'll tear us apart." Orion's mind raced. They couldn't win this fight by brute force, they needed to outthink their enemies. "Tarek," he called out, dodging a strike from one of the Wraiths. "Can you disrupt their connection to this dimension?" Tarek's eyes lit up with understanding. "Give me a minute." He dropped to one knee, his hands flying over the controls on his wrist. "I can manipulate the energy flow here, but it's going to cause a massive backlash. Do it, Orion said, not hesitating. We don't have any other choice. Tarek's fingers flew faster, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. The wraiths screamed, their forms flickering violently as the dimensional fabric around them started to unravel. With a final surge of power, Tarek severed their connection to the pocket universe, and the wraiths dissolved into nothingness. The silence that followed was eerie. The landscape seemed to settle, and in the distance, they saw Ida, the final fragment of the artifact, resting on a pedestal of twisted metal and stone. Orion led the way, his steps steady but heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. As they approached the fragment, the air around it shimmered with raw energy. "This is it," he said quietly. The last piece. Celia, her face pale but resolute, reached out with her mind. "I can feel it. The Harbinger's close. He's been waiting for this." Without hesitation, Orion lifted the fragment from the pedestal, and the world around them began to shift violently. The pocket universe was collapsing. "We need to get out of here, now!" he shouted. Tarek activated the portal generator, and the team was pulled back through dimensions, barely escaping the collapsing realm. As they emerged back onto the Argentum, the ship's systems roared to life, warning them of the imminent threat. The Harbinger's ship loomed in the distance, a dark, ominous vessel that radiated power. It was clear that he had been waiting for them to gather all the fragments. Now, the final battle was upon them. Orion stood at the helm of the Argentum, his hands gripping the controls. "This is it. Everything we fought for comes down to this moment." Tarek and Celia stood beside him, both exhausted but determined. "We can't let him activate the artifact," Tarek said. "If he does, it's over." The Argentum shot toward the Harbinger's ship, its engines roaring as they closed the distance. Inside, the team prepared for the final confrontation. The Harbinger, a figure cloaked in shadow, appeared on their monitors, his voice cold and calculating. "You've done well to gather the fragments," he said, his tone laced with dark amusement. "But you've only delayed the inevitable. The universe must be reborn, and I will be its architect." Orion's voice was steady as he responded. "You're not a god, Harbinger. You're just a man playing with forces you don't understand." The Harbinger's laugh echoed through the ship. "I understand more than you could ever imagine, Captain, and soon, you will understand too." The battle began in earnest. The Argentum dodged and weaved through the Harbinger's defenses, firing bursts of energy at his ship. But the Harbinger's vessel was unlike anything they had encountered, its technology ancient and far beyond their understanding. As the two ships clashed, the Harbinger activated the artifact. Reality itself began to warp, the stars bending and distorting as the power of the artifact surged through the universe. The Avengers felt the effects immediately as their ship's systems began to fail, and the fabric of space-time started to unravel around them. "We have to stop him," Tarek shouted, desperately trying to keep the ship stable. "The artifact's tearing everything apart." Orion's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop the Harbinger, but they were running out of time. As the universe began to collapse around them, Celia suddenly spoke, her voice calm and clear. "There's a flaw," she said, her eyes glowing with psychic energy. "The artifact isn't perfect. It's unstable. If we can disrupt its power, we can destroy it." Orion nodded, his mind already forming a plan. "Tarek, can you channel the ship's energy into the artifact? Overload it?" Tarek's eyes widened. "It's risky. If we do that, the backlash could destroy us." Orion's gaze was steely. "It's a risk we have to take." With a grim nod, Tarek began to reroute the Argentum's power systems, channeling every ounce of energy they had into the artifact. The ship shook violently as the energy built up, and the Harbinger's voice echoed through the ship once more. "You can't stop what's already begun," he said, his voice full of dark triumph. But Orion's resolve never wavered. "Watch me." With a final surge of power, the Argentum unleashed its energy into the artifact. The resulting explosion was blinding, a burst of light and energy that rippled across the universe. The artifact shattered, its pieces disintegrating into nothingness as the Harbinger's ship was consumed by the blast. The Avengers barely survived the explosion. Their ship, damaged but still intact, drifted in the void as the universe slowly began to stabilize. The Harbinger was gone, and the artifact was destroyed. For a long moment, there was only silence. "We did it," Tarek whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Orion stood at the helm, his face lined with exhaustion but his eyes shining with determination. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We did." As the Argentum limped back toward their base, the weight of what they had accomplished settled in. They had saved the universe, but the cost had been great. The team was forever changed, their bond forged in the fires of battle. The universe was safe, for now. But as they looked out into the vast expanse of space, they knew that the echoes of their battle with the Harbinger would linger for a long time to come. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The roar of New York City traffic was drowned out by the thunderous crash of buildings collapsing. The ground shook beneath the feet of the Avengers as they stood, bewildered, amidst the chaos. Cars screeched to a halt, horns blaring in panic. Civilians screamed, running in every direction to escape the unfolding disaster. For years, Earth's mightiest heroes had faced gods, aliens, and mad titans. They had battled across galaxies and saved the world from annihilation more times than they could count. But today, their enemy wasn't from another planet or another realm. This time, their adversaries were ordinary humans who had somehow become more powerful than anyone could have imagined. "Avengers, fall back!" Captain America's voice rang out, cutting through the pandemonium. His shield, dented and scorched, hung loosely in his grip. He had never seen an attack like this, not from humans. It didn't make sense. Tony Stark's repulsor beams fired from the sky, knocking back one of the assailants, an exterminator who had just crushed a car with his bare hands. But before Tony could land a follow-up shot, the man's eyes glowed, and Stark's suit malfunctioned, sending him spiraling uncontrollably into the ground. He crashed through the side of a building, disappearing in a cloud of smoke. "This is bad. Really bad," Black Widow muttered, dodging debris as she weaved through the chaos, her taser batons crackling with electricity. Hawkeye loosed an arrow that whizzed past her, narrowly missing another exterminator who shrugged off the explosive tip like it was nothing more than a mosquito bite. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall man, with piercing eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, commanding an aura of absolute power. Marcus Kane. Once, he had been just like any other man, obsessed with superheroes, following their every move, idolizing them. Now, he was something else entirely. Marcus stood calmly in the midst of the destruction, watching as his exterminators dismantled the Avengers with chilling efficiency. His expression was one of indifference, as though the carnage unfolding before him was a natural progression of events. "This ends now," Captain America shouted, throwing his shield toward Marcus. But in a blur of movement, Marcus raised his hand, and the shield stopped midair, suspended by an invisible force. With a flick of his wrist, it reversed direction and shot back toward Steve Rogers, who barely ducked in time to avoid decapitation. "Steve, we need to regroup," Natasha yelled, darting to his side. "He's too strong," Cap muttered, frustration clear in his voice. "We need a new strategy." In the distance, Thor was locked in combat with another exterminator, his hammer clashing against the enemy's fists in a storm of lightning and thunder. But even the god of thunder was being pushed back, his strength seemingly matched by this human foe. Tony's voice crackled over the comms, struggling to be heard over the static. "Cop a broken bar, we broken bar, tow a broken bar, retreat a broken bar." The connection fizzled out, leaving only silence. Cap clenched his fists. This wasn't a battle they could win, and not today. They were outmatched in every way. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice resolute. The Avengers had faced countless threats before, but this one was different. And until they understood exactly what they were dealing with, charging in headfirst would only get them killed. As they retreated, Marcus Kane watched them go, his lips curling into a satisfied smile. He had won the first battle, and he knew it. But for Marcus, this was only the beginning. Hours later, in a hidden underground facility on the outskirts of the city, the Avengers regrouped. The air was thick with tension as each of them processed what had happened. Tony Stark sat hunched over a table, his suit battered and sparking. His face, usually full of bravado, was etched with frustration. "We underestimated them," Tony said flatly, staring at the holographic display in front of him. It showed the events of the day. Footage from security cameras and news broadcasts. Every frame showed the exterminators tearing through the city, effortlessly overpowering the Avengers. "Who the hell are these people?" Clint Barton asked, his voice laced with anger. "They're just a broken bar humans, right?" Steve Rogers shook his head. "They were human, once. But whatever they've become now, a broken bar, it's something else entirely." "It's not just strength," Natasha added, her voice low. "It's precision. They knew exactly how to counter each of us. It's like they've been watching us, studying our every move." Tony nodded. "And they've got tech that rivals mine." "Whoever Marcus Kane is, he's not just some power-hungry maniac. He's got resources, intelligence, a broken bar, and a serious vendetta against us." "Why?" Steve asked, pacing the room. "What's his endgame? What does he want?" Bruce Banner, standing quietly in the corner, finally spoke. "He wants to destroy us, all of us." The room fell silent as Bruce's words hung in the air. "Destroy them? Why? What had they done to deserve this?" "We need to understand him," Steve said after a long pause. "Find out who he is, why he's doing this." "I already know who he is," Tony replied, his fingers tapping furiously on the holographic keyboard. "Marcus Kane, former fanboy turned full-on sociopath. He's been off the grid for years, but I just pulled up some old files." The screen flickered to life, showing an image of Marcus as a younger man, standing in front of the Avengers Tower, beaming with excitement. The photo was from years ago, back when Marcus was nothing more than a starstruck fan. "He was obsessed with us," Tony explained. "Followed every battle, every mission." "But something changed." "He went dark about 5 years ago. No social media, no public appearances. It's like he vanished. And now he's back, leading an army of superhumans," Natasha mused, folding her arms. "What happened to him?" Bruce frowned, stepping closer to the screen. "He must have found something that gave him and his followers their powers." "Something dangerous," Steve added, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to find out what it was and stop it before it spreads." 5 years earlier, Marcus Kane had stood among a crowd of fans, staring up at the Avengers Tower with awe in his eyes. He had idolized them. They were gods among men, protectors of the weak, symbols of hope. But over time, his admiration had turned to doubt, and doubt had turned to disillusionment. The battles had become too frequent. Cities were destroyed, lives were lost, and all in the name of keeping the peace. To Marcus, it seemed like the world was stuck in a never-ending cycle of destruction, with the Avengers at its center. He began to wonder, what if the world didn't need them? What if humanity could be better, stronger, without relying on these so-called heroes? That question gnawed at him, and soon he found himself searching for answers. His journey led him to the remote jungles of South America, where ancient ruins whispered of forgotten powers. It was there, among the crumbling stone temples and forbidden rituals, that Marcus discovered the key to his transformation. The ritual was dangerous, a long-forgotten relic of an age when humans had once sought to transcend their limitations. Marcus completed the ritual, enduring unimaginable pain as his body and mind were forever changed. When it was over, he emerged with powers beyond anything he could have dreamed of. And he wasn't alone. Marcus returned to the world with a new purpose: to free humanity from the shackles of superheroes. He gathered followers, ordinary people who shared his belief that the time of heroes had passed. He led them through the same ritual, transforming them into exterminators, warriors with one goal: the destruction of every superhero on Earth. Marcus Kane watched the city lights flicker below, his arms crossed as the cool night air swept across the balcony. His exterminators were still out there, regrouping after their victory. They had sent the Avengers a message today, one that would echo across the world. The age of superheroes was over. He turned as footsteps approached behind him. It was Eva, one of his most trusted exterminators, a woman who had once been a tech genius working for a startup in Silicon Valley before she had seen the truth in Marcus's vision. Now, she was more than a genius, she was unstoppable. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight braid, and her sharp, calculating eyes glinted with intensity. "It's done," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "The Avengers have retreated. They won't be bothering us for a while." Marcus nodded, a hint of satisfaction playing on his lips. "Good." But this was just the opening move. "We're not finished." "Do you really think they'll just roll over and accept defeat?" Eva asked, stepping forward to stand beside him. "They're superheroes, they're not built to give up." Marcus's expression hardened. "No, they won't give up, but they'll start questioning themselves. That's what we need. If we can make them doubt their purpose, yeah, make the world doubt Ama, then their power crumbles. Heroes only exist because people believe in them." Eva glanced down at the streets below, where police sirens wailed in the distance. "And if they don't, then we show them what real power looks like," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "The ritual isn't just a gift, it's a weapon. And if we have to use it to cleanse the world of these false gods, then so be it." He turned to Eva, his gaze sharp. "Prepare the next phase. I want the ritual broadcast globally. It's time humanity know what's possibly what they can become." Eva hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. "Marcus, if we broadcast the ritual, we're opening Pandora's box. Anyone could gain these powers. We won't be able to control what happens next." "I don't want to control it," Marcus replied, his voice cold. "I want to set humanity free." The Avengers hadn't felt this defeated in a long time. They had faced cosmic entities, genocidal warlords, and threats from other dimensions, but something about this felt different. The exterminators weren't just enemies, they were a reflection of humanity's own desires, its darker impulses. And that made them unpredictable. Tony Stark was in his lab, furiously working on a new suit upgrade. His mind was racing through possible countermeasures, but nothing seemed to stick. Every time he thought of a solution, he came back to the same problem. The exterminators weren't just using advanced technology or brute strength, they were using something more primal, something he couldn't quite quantify. "Tony," Steve Rogers' voice broke the silence as he entered the lab. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp, determined. "We need to talk." "Yeah, I know," Tony muttered without looking up. His hands moved quickly, assembling a piece of tech. "I'm already working on it." "It's not just about the tech," Steve said, stepping closer. "We need to figure out who they are, what they want. This isn't just a fight we can win by punching harder or building a bigger suit." Tony set down his tools and turned to face Steve, his expression hard. "You think I don't know that? They caught us off guard because we didn't see this coming. They're using something we don't understand, and we're flying blind. That's why we need to get inside their heads," Steve insisted. "Figure out their next move before they make it." Tony let out a long breath, rubbing his temples. "All right, let's say we do that. We find out who they are and why they're doing this. What then? We ask them nicely to stop?" "No," Steve replied, his voice steady. "We remind them why the world needs us. They're trying to make people believe that heroes are obsolete. We need to prove them wrong." Marcus Kane stood in front of a massive array of monitors in a darkened room, his fingers hovering over a control panel. Eva and several other exterminators stood behind him, watching as he prepared to initiate the global broadcast of the ritual. This would be the turning point at the moment humanity was given the choice to become something more, something greater than they had ever dreamed. "This is it," Marcus said quietly, his eyes focused on the screens. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Eva stepped forward, her face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. "Are you sure about this? If the Avengers find out what we're doing, they can't stop us." Marcus cut her off. "This is bigger than them now. This is about the future of our species." With a final, decisive motion, Marcus activated the broadcast. Across the world, screens flickered to life, showing the same image. Marcus Kane standing in front of the ancient temple where the ritual had taken place. His voice rang out, clear and powerful. "People of Earth," he began, "for too long, you have been held captive by the idea that only a select few can possess power, that only those born different, or gifted by fate, can shape the world. But that ends today." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I was once like you," he continued, "ordinary, powerless. I believed in heroes. I believed they were our salvation. But I was wrong. Heroes are not the answer, they are the problem." In every country, in every city, people watched in stunned silence as Marcus spoke. "The ritual I discovered can change everything. It can give you the power you've always been denied, the power to be more than human. Today, I offer you a choice. You can continue to live in the shadows of your so-called heroes, or you can take control of your own destiny." As Marcus's speech echoed across the globe, the Avengers watched in horror from their hidden base. Tony's eyes widened as he saw what Marcus was doing. "He's broadcasting the ritual," Tony muttered. "He's giving it to everyone." Steve's face was grim. "We need to stop this now." The Avengers scrambled into action, racing to intercept the exterminators before the ritual could spread any further. But Marcus had planned for this. As the heroes approached the exterminators' stronghold, they were met with overwhelming resistance. The battle was fierce, with both sides unleashing everything they had. But the exterminators were prepared. They had studied the Avengers, anticipated their every move. And despite the heroes' best efforts, they were once again outmatched. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus faced Captain America, his eyes filled with cold determination. "You can't stop this," Marcus said, his voice steady. "The world is changing, whether you like it or not." Steve clenched his jaw, his shield raised. "You think giving people power like this will make things better? It'll only lead to chaos. You can't control what happens next." "I don't want to control it," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "I want to free humanity from the illusion that they need you." With a swift motion, Marcus lunged, his fists crackling with energy. The two men clashed, the force of their blows shaking the ground beneath them. Tony and the others fought desperately to hold back the exterminators, but they were losing ground. The ritual had already begun to spread, and more people were beginning to unlock their newfound powers. As the battle raged, Tony's voice crackled over the comms. "I've got a plan, but it's risky. We can disable the broadcast, but it'll take everything we've got." "Do it," Steve replied, deflecting another of Marcus's attacks. "We don't have a choice." In the final moments of the battle, Tony unleashed his last invention, a device that scrambled the signal of the broadcast, cutting it off before it could fully spread. Marcus, realizing what was happening, let out a roar of rage, his powers surging in a final, desperate attack. But it was too late. The ritual had been stopped. Marcus was defeated. As the dust settled and the exterminators were subdued, the Avengers stood victorious. But the victory felt hollow. The world had seen the power that Marcus had offered, and they would not forget. Even in defeat, Marcus's message had left its mark. The Avengers gathered in the aftermath, bruised and battered, but still standing. Steve looked out over the city, his face etched with uncertainty. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Tony nodded, his expression grim. "No, it's not." And so, with the threat of the exterminators temporarily quelled, the Avengers were left to ponder the future. The world had changed, and the role of superheroes had never been more uncertain. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The skies over Manhattan were dark with clouds, the low rumble of thunder vibrating in the distance as the Avengers landed silently on the roof of an unmarked building. Ant-Man, at the forefront of the group, adjusted his helmet, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Below them, deep within the facility, an underground organization was tampering with quantum energy, an energy so unpredictable and dangerous that even the slightest mistake could tear reality itself apart. Ant-Man, also known as Scott Lang, was no stranger to the quantum realm. He'd ventured there before and lived to tell the tale, but this time, it wasn't just about survival. The energy these rogue scientists were playing with could easily be weaponized, threatening not only their world but the fabric of the universe. "Ready, Scott?" Tony Stark's voice cut through the quiet, his Iron Man suit gleaming in the low light. Scott nodded, taking a deep breath. "I've got this, Tony. Just make sure everyone's ready in case things go sideways." "They always do," Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, muttered from behind him, her eyes scanning the roof for any signs of trouble. Beside her, Steve Rogers, Captain America, stood with his shield at the ready, his face hard with determination. With a final glance at the team, Ant-Man shrank down, his body disappearing into the tiniest of particles. He slipped through the cracks in the building's ventilation system, navigating the tight spaces with ease. His mission was simple: get to the core of the quantum reactor, disable it, and get out. But as he moved through the labyrinth of wires and ducts, an uneasy feeling crept over him. Something wasn't right. The hum of energy coming from the reactor was far more intense than it should have been. The deeper he went, the more unstable it felt. Scott reached the heart of the reactor, his size shifting back to normal as he landed in front of the control panel. Sparks flew from the massive machinery, the hum now a deafening roar. His heart raced as he began to pull wires, trying to disarm the system before it was too late. But as his hands worked swiftly, the reactor pulsed violently. A burst of energy exploded from its core, and before Scott could react, the world around him folded in on itself. In an instant, everything went black. When Scott opened his eyes, he wasn't in the reactor anymore. The ground beneath him wasn't solid, it was shifting, flickering between particles, like sand slipping through fingers. The sky above him was a swirling vortex of color, and nothing around him made any sense. "Scott!" a voice called from behind. He turned to see Tony Stark, his Iron Man suit dim, standing just a few feet away. The rest of the team was scattered around, each looking as confused and disoriented as he felt. "Where are we?" Thor's deep voice rumbled as he glanced around, Mjolnir in hand. "This realm a broken bar, it's not of our world." "It's the quantum realm," Scott said, his voice shaky. "We're inside it." Natasha took a step forward, her brows furrowed. "How is that possible?" Scott swallowed hard. "The reactor must have overloaded. Instead of shutting it down, I think I triggered a quantum energy burst. It's like we got sucked into a subatomic black hole." Tony let out a low whistle, his hands on his hips. "Well, that's new." Steve's jaw clenched. "How do we get out?" "A broken bar, I don't know." Scott's eyes darted around, his mind racing. "The quantum realm doesn't follow the same rules as our world. Time, space, even matter, it's all different here." Tony activated his suit's scanners, but the results that flashed across his screen only added to the confusion. "We're not in Kansas anymore. There's no structure, no solid ground. Everything is in flux." As if on cue, the ground beneath them began to ripple like water. The team staggered, struggling to maintain their footing as the environment shifted around them. "Stay together," Steve barked, gripping his shield tighter. But the quantum realm had no intention of letting them regroup so easily. The landscape twisted again, particles swirling in chaotic patterns, and before the Avengers could react, they were pulled in different directions, scattered across the ever-shifting terrain. Scott found himself alone, his mind reeling as he struggled to comprehend the environment. The quantum realm wasn't just strange, it was alive. The particles around him were behaving like ordinary matter, they moved with purpose, as if they were aware of his presence. As he stepped forward, the ground beneath him shifted, forming pathways of energy that seemed to guide his movements. "Tony? Steve?" He called out, his voice swallowed by the empty space. But there was no answer, only silence. Scott kept moving, his mind racing through possible solutions. He had been in the quantum realm before, but not like this. This wasn't just a shrinking experience, it was a world of its own, governed by its own set of laws. He needed to figure out what those laws were if he had any hope of getting out. Suddenly, a flash of light caught his eye. In the distance, he saw something moving, something massive. It shimmered in and out of existence, its form constantly shifting, like a creature made of pure energy. Scott's breath caught in his throat. Whatever it was coming toward him. He had no time to think. Instinct kicked in, and he shrank down, disappearing into the quantum particles just as the creature passed overhead. It didn't seem to notice him, its attention focused elsewhere, but the sheer scale of it left him shaken. This place wasn't just dangerous, it was alive. Meanwhile, Tony Stark floated through the quantum realm, his Iron Man suit struggling to maintain power. The energy here was unlike anything he'd encountered before. It wasn't just draining his suit, it was interfering with its very functionality. Great, he muttered, pulling up diagnostics on his HUD. Stuck in a place where physics doesn't exist and my suit's throwing a tantrum. He scanned the area, trying to make sense of the shifting landscape. It was like being trapped inside a kaleidoscope, with colors and shapes constantly morphing, never staying the same for more than a few seconds. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Tony saw a flicker of movement. Something was approaching him, something fast. He didn't have time to react before the creature slammed into him, sending him spiraling through the air. Damn it, Tony grunted, his suit struggling to stabilize as he careened through the quantum void. The creature, a swirling mass of energy, hovered nearby, its form shifting and pulsing. Tony raised an arm, firing a repulsor blast at the creature, but the energy passed right through it, dissipating harmlessly. Of course, Tony muttered. It's not physical. Nothing here is. The creature darted toward him again, and Tony barely managed to dodge. It was too fast for him to keep up. He needed a new plan, and fast. Suddenly, an idea hit him. The quantum realm was all about energy. If he couldn't fight this thing physically, maybe he could disrupt it. Let's see if I can play your game, Tony murmured, adjusting the settings on his suit's power core. He channeled all his remaining energy into a concentrated pulse, directing it toward the creature. The effect was immediate. The creature shuddered, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain cohesion. With a final surge, it disintegrated into a cloud of particles, scattering into the void. Tony exhaled, his body sagging with relief. One down, infinity to go. On the other side of the quantum realm, Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff were facing their own challenges. The ground beneath them had fragmented into floating platforms, each one barely large enough to stand on. The air was thick with tension, the energy around them crackling with danger. Stay close, Steve said, his voice steady as he scanned the area. We don't know what we're dealing with here. Natasha nodded, her eyes sharp as she assessed their surroundings. Whatever this place is, it's not playing by our rules. Just as the words left her mouth, the platform beneath them began to tremble. Steve's instincts kicked in, and he grabbed Natasha's arm, pulling her back just as the ground gave way. They tumbled through the air, landing on a lower platform with a heavy thud. Natasha groaned, rolling onto her back. Thanks for the save, Cap. Steve offered her a hand, pulling her to her feet. Let's try not to do that again. As they stood, the air around them shifted, growing colder. Steve's breath misted in the air, and a deep, menacing growl echoed from the shadows. Looks like we've got company, Natasha said, her hand going to the gun strapped to her thigh. Out of the darkness emerged a figure, tall, towering, and entirely made of energy. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its body crackled with raw power. Steve raised his shield, his stance firm. We've dealt with worse. The creature lunged, and the battle began. Steve Rogers braced himself as the energy creature charged toward him. With a swift motion, He swung his shield, deflecting the first attack. The sheer force of the impact reverberated through his body, but he held firm. Natasha circled around the creature, her movements precise and calculated. She pulled out her pistol and fired, but the bullets passed straight through the creature, doing nothing to slow its advance. "It's like trying to hit smoke," Natasha yelled, frustration creeping into her voice. Steve dodged another swipe from the creature, his mind racing. The rules of combat didn't apply here. The creature wasn't made of flesh and bone, it was pure energy, shifting and crackling with power. He needed to think outside the box. "Tony, we need backup," Steve shouted into his communicator, but only static answered him. The quantum realm was cutting off their communications. They were on their own. The creature lunged again, this time with a surge of energy that knocked Steve off his feet. He tumbled across the platform, his shield clattering to the ground. Natasha rolled out of the way, narrowly avoiding the attack, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the battlefield. "This thing's not going to stop until we figure out how to disrupt it," she said through gritted teeth. Steve picked himself up, his mind churning. "Energy can't be destroyed, but it can be redirected, right?" Natasha's eyes lit up with understanding. "If we can overload it, maybe we can disperse it." Steve nodded, formulating a plan. "I'll distract it." "You set a trap." Without waiting for a reply, Steve charged at the creature again, his shield raised. He dodged and weaved, drawing its attention while Natasha swiftly worked behind him, setting up an improvised device from her remaining tech. The creature roared, its glowing eyes fixed on Steve, each attack growing more aggressive as it seemed to feed off the energy around them. Just as the creature prepared for another devastating strike, Natasha's voice cut through the chaos. "Now!" Steve dove to the side as Natasha activated her device. A pulse of energy shot out, enveloping the creature. It froze for a moment, its form flickering as if unsure whether to continue its attack. Then, with a crackling surge, the creature exploded into particles, dissolving into the air. Steve wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced at Natasha. "That was close." "Too close," Natasha muttered, looking around. "Let's keep moving. We need to regroup with the others." They started across the fragmented platforms again, but Steve couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. This realm, it was playing tricks on them. He could feel it in his bones. Meanwhile, Ant-Man stumbled through the shifting quantum landscape, his mind racing. He hadn't seen the rest of the team since they were separated, and the weight of that responsibility was beginning to bear down on him. He had been the one to trigger this disaster, and now it was up to him to find a way out. The ground beneath his feet shifted, particles swirling and reforming with each step. He was alone in this strange world, a place where reality itself bent and twisted. He could feel the quantum energy coursing through everything around him, and yet, it was unpredictably chaotic. In the distance, he saw a glimmer of movement. At first, he thought it might be one of the others, but as he approached, he realized it was something else entirely. It was a figure, a humanoid, but translucent, as if it was made entirely of light. "Hello?" Scott called out cautiously. The figure turned toward him, its features indistinct. "You should not be here," it said, its voice echoing strangely in the vastness of the quantum realm. Scott hesitated, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "We didn't exactly mean to be here. How do we get out?" The figure's form flickered. "There is no escape, not without the key." "What key?" Scott's mind raced. Was this entity something native to the quantum realm, or was it something else entirely? He needed answers. "The key to controlling the energy," the figure replied cryptically. "But the quantum wraith will not let you leave." Scott's heart skipped a beat. "The quantum wraith?" The figure's form wavered, as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. "It feeds on the energy of those who become trapped here. It will come for you and your companions. You must find the key before it finds you." Before Scott could ask anything else, the figure vanished, dissolving into the swirling particles around him. He stood there, stunned, his mind racing. The quantum wraith, or whatever it was, It was hunting them. And if this mysterious figure was right, the only way out was to find some kind of key, a way to control the energy of the quantum realm. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew one thing for sure: time was running out. Tony Stark's suit was on its last legs. Every system was malfunctioning, and he was losing power fast. The quantum energy was wreaking havoc on his tech, and without a way to recharge, he was as good as grounded. "Come on, baby," Tony muttered, trying to coax his suit back to life. "Don't quit on me now." He was floating through the quantum realm, the landscape around him constantly shifting and changing. He had no sense of direction, no way to orient himself. Every time he thought he saw a landmark, it would dissolve into a swirl of particles before he could get close. Then, out of nowhere, his head flickered. For a brief second, it picked up a signal in a weak, but there. Tony's heart leapt. "Jarvis, track that signal." The eye responded with a series of garbled beeps, but it managed to lock onto the source of the signal. Tony adjusted his flight path, using the last bit of power in his suit to follow the signal. As he got closer, the source became clear, a small, glowing orb, pulsing with quantum energy. Tony landed in front of the orb, his suit's power flickering as he knelt down to examine it. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The energy radiating from it was powerful, but it wasn't chaotic like the rest of the quantum realm. It was controlled and focused. "This has to be it," Tony murmured. "The key." But as he reached out to touch the orb, a shadow fell over him. He looked up just in time to see something massive descending from the sky. It was the quantum wraith. The creature was enormous, its form constantly shifting, like a storm of energy given shape. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its presence radiated pure, unrelenting hunger. Tony's suit sputtered and died. He was defenseless. "Okay," Tony muttered. "This is bad." The quantum wraith surged toward him, its form rippling with power. Tony had seconds to act. He grabbed the orb, feeling the quantum energy pulse through him. It was overwhelming, almost too much for him to handle, but he had no choice. "Let's see if this thing works." With a surge of willpower, Tony channeled the energy of the orb. The quantum wraith hesitated, as if sensing the power in Tony's hands. It snarled, its form flickering, but Tony held his ground. The energy flowed through him, and for a brief moment, he could feel the quantum realm itself bending to his will. The wraith roared, lunging at him, but Tony didn't flinch. He focused the energy into a single, concentrated blast. The wraith shrieked as the blast hit it, its form dissolving into a storm of particles. With a final, echoing scream, the quantum wraith disintegrated, leaving nothing behind but silence. Tony stood there, panting, the orb still glowing faintly in his hands. "Guess I'm not getting my security deposit back on this suit." He turned, seeing a familiar figure approaching from the distance. Steve Rogers, with Natasha right behind him. "You guys took your time," Tony said, his voice weary but relieved. Steve raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too," Tony muttered, handing Steve the orb. "This is the key. It's the only way we're getting out of here." Natasha glanced at the orb, her expression cautious. "And you're sure it works?" Tony shrugged. "Worked well enough to vaporize the big bad." Steve nodded. "Let's find the others." Time to go home. They regrouped with Ant-Man, and together, they used the orb's energy to tear open a rift in the quantum realm. The swirling particles around them seemed to resist at first, but the orb's power was too strong. The rift widened, and for the first time since their ordeal began, they could see the real world on the other side. One by one, the Avengers stepped through the rift, their bodies returning to normal size as they re-entered reality. The moment they were all through, the rift snapped shut, sealing the quantum realm behind them. Back in the real world, the facility was in ruins, but they were alive. Tony tossed the orb into the wreckage with a tired sigh. "Let's never do that again." Steve smiled faintly. "Agreed." As the team regrouped, Scott Lang stood a little apart from the others, staring at the wreckage of the reactor. He had been the one to trigger the event that sent them into the quantum realm, but in the end, they had all survived. Still, the experience left him with lingering unease. The quantum realm was far from understood, and he couldn't shake the feeling that, someday, it might call them back. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The sky above Earth was clear, the calm before the storm. At first, it had seemed like any other day. Citizens went about their lives unaware of the approaching disaster, but it didn't take long before that peace was shattered. The sudden blackout of communication satellites sent ripples of confusion and fear across the globe. Within minutes, governments scrambled to make sense of the situation as unidentified objects were detected entering Earth's atmosphere. Marcus Hale, commander of Earth's elite defense force, known simply as the Avengers, stood in the Situation Room, eyes fixed on the flickering display. His jaw tightened as reports flooded in from across the globe. Major cities were being targeted. These weren't meteors or space debris. They were ships, and they were descending fast. "Commander," a young officer called out, voice shaking. "We've lost contact with Los Angeles." Marcus didn't respond right away. His focus zeroed in on the incoming visuals. Sleek, angular crafts unlike anything Earth had seen before were descending from the sky, causing chaos wherever they landed. One thing was clear: this was an invasion. "Activate the defense systems," Marcus ordered, his voice a deep rumble of authority. "Mobilize all units. We're going to show them we aren't easy prey." Within moments, the Avengers, Earth's most advanced military unit, were deployed. Fighter jets took to the skies, and ground forces engaged as best they could. But the enemy was far more advanced. The alien ships moved with precision, their energy weapons cutting through Earth's defenses like paper. As the invasion spread across the globe, Marcus watched helplessly. His team fought valiantly, but the alien technology was too powerful. These invaders were unlike anything they had prepared for. Still, he wasn't one to back down. Earth would fight to the end. Hours passed, and the battlefield was littered with the remains of Earth's defenses. But a flicker of hope emerged when one of the alien soldiers was captured alive. The raider, a wounded creature clad in unfamiliar armor, lay restrained in the interrogation room of the Avengers headquarters. Marcus stood before the alien, flanked by his second-in-command, Sarah Cole. The alien's skin was a pale, sickly blue, its eyes dark and sunken. Marcus had expected a ruthless enemy, but what he saw instead was a being barely clinging to life. The creature's breathing was labored, and its eyes flickered with desperation, not hatred. "We need answers," Marcus said sternly, staring down at the alien. "Why are you here? What do you want from us?" The alien coughed weakly, its voice a rasp that echoed through the room. "We are the Galder," it began, speaking through a translator. "Our world is dying." "We had no choice." "No choice?" Sarah snapped, anger flashing in her eyes. "You invade our planet, kill our people, and now you claim you had no choice?" The alien's gaze met hers, and for a moment, there was silence. "We do not wish for war," it said quietly. "But our home is collapsing. We need resources." "Your world, it is rich in what we need." Marcus frowned, absorbing the alien's words. It didn't seem to be lying. In fact, there was a deep sadness in its voice. He turned to Sarah, who shook her head in disbelief. "You're saying your people are doing this to survive?" Marcus asked, his voice softening. The alien nodded. "We are scavengers, forced to take from others to keep our world alive. We have lost much, too much." The weight of the alien's words settled over Marcus like a lead blanket. This wasn't a simple case of good versus evil. These invaders weren't monsters, they were desperate. And that made things far more complicated. The Avengers gathered in the war room to discuss what they had learned. The mood was tense. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, her face set in a hard frown, while the rest of the team watched Marcus expectantly. The information the alien had given them left them all grappling with a difficult reality. "This changes things," Marcus began, addressing the room. "We're not just fighting an enemy looking to conquer us for sport or power. These raiders are fighting for survival. Their world is dying." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "So what? Are we supposed to let them strip our planet to save their own? What happens to us then?" "I'm not saying that," Marcus replied, his tone measured. "But we need to think about what we're dealing with. We're fighting against a species that doesn't want to kill us. They have to. If we push them to extinction, what does that make us?" Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Survivors, Marcus." "It makes us survivors." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty of his team. This wasn't the battle they had expected. This was something far more complicated. He knew the truth that if they continued to fight like this, it would end in tragedy for both sides. "We have to find another way," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the decision. "We're going to propose a ceasefire." The Avengers approached the aliens with a proposal for a temporary ceasefire, hoping to buy time to find a solution that could benefit both sides. The idea was risky, but Marcus believed it was their only chance to avoid annihilation. With great caution, they arranged a meeting with the leader of the raiders, High Commander Zelter. The meeting took place aboard the alien mothership, a colossal structure that loomed over Earth like a dark shadow. Marcus and a small team of diplomats boarded the alien craft, their hearts heavy with uncertainty. Inside, they were met by Zelter, a tall, imposing figure whose presence commanded respect. His skin shimmered with a silvery hue, and his eyes were a piercing shade of violet. He regarded the humans with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Commander Hale," Zelter said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "You wish to discuss terms." Marcus stepped forward, meeting the alien leader's gaze. "We know why you're here. We understand that your people are fighting for survival, but so are we. There has to be a better way than this." Zelter's expression was unreadable. "Your planet has what we need. Without your resources, my people will die. And if you take them by force, Earth will be left in ruins," Marcus countered. "We're offering a different path. We have technology and renewable energy systems that could help you stabilize your planet's environment. If you agree to stop the attack, we'll share this technology with you." Zelter's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to trust you?" Marcus nodded. "I'm asking you to trust that we both want the same thing as survival." The silence stretched on, tension thick in the air. Finally, Zelter spoke. "I will consider your offer. But know this, Commander, my people are desperate. If this is a trick, we will destroy your world." The ceasefire was tenuous, but it held. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a glimmer of hope. Yet, not everyone was convinced that peace was the right path. Both on Earth and among the alien ranks, dissent brewed. On the alien side, a faction led by General Vox rejected the ceasefire. Vox was a hardened warrior, scarred by years of loss. He believed that the only way to secure his people's future was through complete domination of Earth. He had no patience for diplomacy or compromise. In secret, Vox began to plot a coup. He gathered followers of those who shared his belief that the humans could not be trusted. Their plan was simple: reignite the war by staging an attack on one of Earth's major cities. If they could break the ceasefire, the raiders would be forced to resume their assault, and any chance of peace would be lost. As General Vox's plan unfolded, tensions rose on both sides. Earth's leaders, growing wary of the fragile ceasefire, started to question the Avengers' approach. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale remained committed to finding a peaceful solution, though he could sense the unrest even within his own ranks. The Avengers, especially Lieutenant Sarah Cole, were torn. Sarah had been vocal about her distrust of the aliens from the start. To her, the ceasefire was a ticking time bomb. One wrong move and Earth would be annihilated. She wasn't alone in her fears. Many soldiers whispered that Marcus was too soft, that Earth's survival was at risk because of his willingness to negotiate. Then, the worst happened. General Vox, with his loyalists, launched an attack on New York City. Explosions rocked the city's skyline, sending civilians fleeing in terror. The Avengers, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. It was chaos. Buildings toppled, fires raged, and panic spread like wildfire. Marcus watched the destruction from the Avengers' headquarters, his heart sinking. This was exactly what he'd feared. "This is it," Sarah said, storming into the command center, her face flushed with anger. "They're showing their true colors. We need to retaliate, now." Marcus hesitated, staring at the screens showing the devastation in New York. He couldn't deny the anger building inside him, but he also knew this attack wasn't sanctioned by Zelter. It was a rogue faction trying to sabotage the peace talks. If they retaliated now, the ceasefire would collapse, and Earth would be thrust back into a full-scale war. "Not yet," Marcus said, his voice strained. "We need to confirm this wasn't authorized by Zelter." "Confirm?" Sarah shot back, her fists clenched. "How many more cities need to burn before you realize we can't trust them?" Marcus met her gaze, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "I'm not willing to sacrifice peace for revenge." "Not yet." While the Avengers worked to contain the destruction in New York, Marcus reached out to Zelter. The alien commander was furious when he learned of Vox's betrayal. Zelter immediately offered to assist the Avengers in taking down Vox's faction, but Marcus knew the situation was far more delicate than that. "Your people are responsible for this," Marcus said, his voice tight over the communication link. "We need more than your assistance. We need to end this threat, once and for all." Zelter agreed. Vox's actions endangered not just the ceasefire but the survival of his entire species. If the humans retaliated, the delicate negotiations would shatter. Together, Marcus and Zelter devised a plan to take down Vox before his rebellion could spread further. As Marcus prepared his team for the mission, he felt the weight of every decision pressing on him. This wasn't just about taking down Vox, it was about saving both Earth and Galder. The plan was simple, but execution would be dangerous. The Avengers would infiltrate Vox's stronghold with the help of Zelter's loyalists, eliminate the rogue general, and restore order before more damage could be done. Sarah, though still skeptical, stood by Marcus's side as they briefed the team. She was a soldier through and through, and despite her doubts, she trusted Marcus's leadership. "You know this is a risk," Sarah said as they suited up. "If this fails, we might not get another chance." "I know," Marcus replied, "but we have to try." They moved quickly, slipping into the night under the cover of darkness. With Zelter's loyal forces providing intelligence, the Avengers infiltrated Vox's base, hidden deep in the mountains. The tension was palpable as they navigated the narrow corridors, knowing that any wrong step could lead to their discovery and the end of the ceasefire. As they reached the central command chamber, they found Vox standing before his loyal soldiers, preparing to launch another assault on Earth. His eyes burned with fanaticism, his voice echoing through the chamber as he rallied his forces. "We will not be slaves to these humans," Vox shouted, raising his fist. "We will take what is ours, by any means necessary." Marcus and Sarah exchanged a glance. This was it. With one last nod, they charged into the chamber, guns blazing. The element of surprise worked in their favor, and they quickly overpowered Vox's guards. Chaos erupted as Vox's forces scattered, unprepared for the sudden attack. Vox, however, was no easy target. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his alien strength and combat skills making him a formidable opponent. But Marcus had faced worse in his career. With precision and determination, he pressed forward, battling through Vox's defenses until they were locked in hand-to-hand combat. "Your kind is weak," Vox sneered, grappling with Marcus. "You don't have the stomach for this war." Marcus didn't respond with words. Instead, he focused on the fight. Every punch, every block, every maneuver calculated to bring down his opponent. The fight was brutal, But in the end, Marcus's training and resolve won out. With a final, crushing blow, he incapacitated Vox, leaving the rogue general unconscious on the floor. With Vox defeated, his rebellion quickly fell apart. The loyalists within the alien ranks were able to restore order, and the threat of a full-scale war was averted. But the battle had taken its toll on everyone involved. As the Avengers regrouped, Marcus felt a deep weariness settle over him. The destruction in New York, the loss of life, it was a heavy burden to bear. Back at Avengers headquarters, Marcus and Zeltra sat down to finalize the peace agreement. It wasn't an easy process. Both sides had suffered, and trust would take time to build. But there was hope. The renewable energy technology from Earth would be shared with the aliens, and in return, the Cosmic Raiders would help Earth rebuild what had been lost. "We have a long road ahead," Zeltra said, his voice solemn. "But perhaps we can learn to coexist." "I hope so," Marcus replied. "For both our sakes." The world began to heal, slowly but surely. Marcus watched as Earth's cities were rebuilt, knowing that it would take time for the scars of war to fade. But he also knew that they had avoided something far worse, a conflict that could have destroyed them all. As for Galder, the alien world began to stabilize, thanks to the shared technology. The partnership between Earth and the Galdorans was fragile, but it held. Marcus had seen the worst that war could bring, but he had also seen the potential for peace, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. He stood on the balcony of Avengers headquarters, looking out at the horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The path to survival didn't always have to be paved in blood. Sometimes, the hardest battles were the ones fought with compassion. The fight wasn't over. But for now, there was peace. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The sun hung high over the endless sea of sand, its scorching rays making the air shimmer as though the earth itself was ablaze. This was the no man's land, a place where even the most advanced machines struggled to operate and where the bravest of explorers rarely returned. Legend had it that nothing could survive in this desolate desert. Yet here they were, trudging through the dunes, the Avengers, an elite group bound by a mission that could very well determine the fate of the entire universe. Alexis, their leader, squinted against the sunlight, the wind kicking up sand that stung her face. Her helmet visor offered some protection, but she preferred to keep it up, feeling more in tune with her surroundings. "We should be getting close," she said, glancing at the navigation display on her wrist. To her left, Ryder, the combat specialist, adjusted his rifle. He was always ready for a fight, his fingers twitching as if sensing danger in the distance. "I don't like it here," he muttered. "Too quiet. And when it's quiet, it's never good." "They say the quiet is where the secrets live," Kayla, the strategist, chimed in. She was the brains behind this mission, the one who'd pieced together the clues leading them to this forgotten land. She pulled a tattered map from her bag, tracing a line with her finger. "According to this, we're almost at the city." The team pressed forward, their steps heavy in the thick sand. For days, they had been following a series of cryptic signals, energy surges unlike anything they'd encountered before. What lay ahead was something more powerful than the cosmic stones they had fought over in the past. Something ancient. Something dangerous. Hours passed, and just as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they saw Ida, an outline of towering spires breaking through the haze of sandstorms. "The forgotten city." "There it is," Alexis whispered, all creeping into her voice. She'd studied the myths, the stories of this place. An ancient civilization, long dead, whose technology surpassed anything the galaxy had ever seen. But the reason for their disappearance was as mysterious as the city itself. "Let's hope what's inside is worth the trip," Ryder said, his voice low. His eyes scanned the ruins, his grip tightening on his rifle as they approached. The city was massive, its buildings tall and imposing even in their ruin. Sand had swallowed most of it, but enough remained for them to see the intricate designs carved into the stony symbols and hieroglyphs from a language none of them recognized. They made their way through the city's outer gates, stepping into what once might have been a bustling metropolis. Now, it was eerily silent. Alexis led the way, her senses on high alert. Something about this place felt alive, as if the city itself was watching them. Kayla knelt beside a crumbled statue, running her hand over the worn stone. This place, it's older than we thought. Pre-human, maybe even pre-alien. Whoever built this had knowledge far beyond our own. Ryder snorted. Then why are they all dead? Maybe they found something they shouldn't have, Kayla replied, standing. Something too powerful to control. They ventured deeper into the city, the air growing colder, heavier, with every step. It wasn't just the temperature. There was a weight, a presence that seemed to press down on them, making their hearts race and their breaths shallow. Alexis stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. We're not alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in dark armor, his face hidden beneath the helmet. The power radiating off him was palpable, like a living thing, coiling around them, squeezing the air from their lungs. Who are you? Alexis demanded, stepping forward, her hand hovering near her weapon. The figure's voice was low, a growl that echoed through the empty streets. I am the one who controls this city, and soon, I will control the universe. It was Hema the warlord, the one they had feared would be here. His reputation had reached across galaxies, a tyrant who left nothing but destruction in his wake. And now, he stood before them, his hand resting on the very power they had come to stop. Ryder raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the warlord lifted his arm, and with a flick of his wrist, sent Ryder crashing into a wall with a force that shattered stone. You are too late, the warlord said, his voice filled with dark amusement. This city's power belongs to me now, and with it, I will reshape the universe in my image. Alexis stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. We won't let that happen. The warlord laughed. You think you can stop me? You, who know nothing of the power that lies beneath this city. You are children, playing with forces you cannot comprehend. He raised his hand, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low rumble echoed through the city as the power surged from the depths, rising to the surface like a beast awakening from a long slumber. Go, Alexis ordered, her voice calm but urgent. Find the core. We need to shut it down before he can use it. Kayla nodded, already pulling out her datapad, scanning for any sign of the energy source. Ryder, groaning as he pushed himself to his feet, gave the warlord one last glare before following Kayla. Alexis stayed behind, keeping her eyes locked on the warlord. We've fought monsters before. We'll fight them again. But you're just a man, hiding behind a power you don't understand. The warlord's smile was hidden beneath his helmet, but she could feel it in his voice. Then you will die like all the others who have stood in my way. The ground continued to shake as the warlord turned, disappearing into the shadows. Alexis didn't hesitate. She ran after Kayla and Ryder, her mind racing. They had to find the source of this power and stop it, but they were running out of time. They reached the center of the city, where a massive chamber lay buried beneath the ruins. Inside, the core pulsed with a dark, ominous energy. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a swirling mass of light and shadow, alive with raw power. Kayla's fingers flew across her datapad. This is it. The power source. If we can overload data. How long? Alexis asked, her eyes scanning the chamber. Not long, Kayla replied. But it's risky. If we overload it too much, the entire city could go up in flames. Ryder grinned. Sounds like my kind of plan. Suddenly, the warlord's voice echoed through the chamber. You will not touch it. He appeared at the entrance, his hand raised, the power of the city coursing through him. He was stronger now, more dangerous. He could control the very fabric of reality around them, bending it to his will. Alexis drew her weapon. Kayla, do it. Now. The warlord's eyes flashed with anger as he lunged toward them, But Alexis was ready. She met him head-on, their weapons clashing with a force that sent shockwaves through the chamber. Ryder fired his rifle, but the warlord deflected the shots with a flick of his wrist. "I told you," the warlord growled. "You cannot win." Alexis felt the sheer force of the warlord's power bearing down on her. Every blow he landed seemed to grow stronger, faster, as if the entire city was fueling him. But she wouldn't back down. Not now. Not when they were this close. She parried another strike, her muscles straining against the impact, and fired her blaster point blank into his chest. The blast hit him dead center, but instead of falling, he absorbed the energy, using it to drive her back. "You're only making me stronger," the warlord snarled, stepping closer, his dark aura expanding like a cloud, choking the life from the chamber. Behind her, Kayla's fingers danced across the datapad, her face etched with concentration. "Almost 3 broken bar just keep him busy," she shouted. Alexis grit her teeth. They needed more time. Ryder, still firing round after round from his rifle, switched tactics, grabbing a grenade from his belt and launching it toward the warlord's feet. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending debris flying, but the warlord emerged unscathed, his eyes glowing with unnatural energy. "I am the master of this city now," he bellowed, lifting his hand. The very ground beneath them began to crack, deep fissures forming as the power of the core twisted the stone. The ancient walls groaned under the pressure, and for a moment, Alexis feared the entire place would collapse before they had a chance to stop him. She charged at him again, but this time he was ready. With a flick of his wrist, he sent her crashing into a pillar, knocking the wind from her lungs. Pain shot through her ribs, but she forced herself to stand, ignoring the throbbing in her chest. "Is that all you've got?" she taunted, her voice rough. She needed to keep him focused on her, to buy Kayla just a few more precious seconds. The warlord's eyes narrowed. "You are insignificant, a speck of dust, and soon, you will be nothing." He moved toward her with terrifying speed, his fist crashing down toward her skull. She barely dodged in time, the force of his blow shattering the stone where she had just stood. But he was relentless, following up with another strike that grazed her arm, tearing through her suit. "Got it!" Kayla suddenly shouted, her voice filled with triumph. Alexis didn't need to hear any more. She threw herself to the ground just as Kayla hit the final sequence on her datapad. The core in the center of the room pulsed violently, the dark energy swirling faster, out of control. The entire chamber trembled as the overload began. The warlord froze, sensing the change. His eyes darted to the core, realization dawning on his face. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice filled with fury. "Stopped you," Kayla replied, standing tall, her datapad still in hand. "This city's power is too much for anyone to control, and now you're going to pay the price for your arrogance." The warlord's expression twisted with rage. He lunged toward the core, his hands outstretched as if he could somehow regain control of the energy now spiraling beyond his grasp. But it was too late. The core was collapsing in on itself, the overload reaching a critical point. "No!" he screamed, the dark energy turning on him, wrapping around him like a living thing. He fought against it, but his own power had grown too great, too unstable. The energy consumed him, pulling him into the core's chaotic vortex. Alexis and the others didn't wait to see the final moments. "Move!" she shouted, grabbing Kayla and Ryder and dragging them toward the exit. The ground was shaking violently now, chunks of stone falling from the ceiling as the entire city began to cave in. They sprinted through the crumbling ruins, dodging debris and leaping over widening cracks in the earth. The ancient city was collapsing around them, the weight of millennia crashing down in an instant. But they couldn't stop. If they didn't make it out in time, they'd be buried along with the warlord and his ambitions. The sky outside was a brilliant, swirling red as they burst through the city's gates, sand whipping around them in violent gusts. Behind them, the ancient city imploded, sinking into the desert with a deafening roar. The core's final surge of power sent a shockwave across the landscape, flattening the nearby dunes and leaving a massive crater where the city had once stood. For a long moment, none of them spoke, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they stared at the destruction. The warlord was gone. The city, its secrets, its power, all of it had been lost to the desert once again. Ryder was the first to break the silence, wiping the sweat and sand from his face. That a broken bar was a hell of a thing, Alexis nodded, her eyes still fixed on the smoking ruins. We did it. Kayla slumped to the ground, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. But at what cost? She whispered. We barely made it out, and the power of that such a broken bar, it's gone. Maybe forever. Maybe that's for the best, Alexis said softly. Some things aren't meant to be controlled. Ryder let out a dry chuckle, though there was no humor in it. Yeah, well, tell that to the next maniac who goes digging around out here. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the desert. The sky above them was a deep, blood red, the aftermath of the core's final pulse still rippling through the atmosphere. They had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not entirely. As they gathered their gear and began the long trek back to their ship, Alexis couldn't help but glance over her shoulder one last time. The no man's land stretched out behind them, silent once more, its secrets buried beneath the sand. She knew this wasn't the end. There would always be more threats, more battles. But for now, they had stopped the warlord's plans, and they had survived. In the fading light of the desert, Alexis allowed herself a brief moment of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together, because that's what they did. They fought, and they survived. The universe was vast, full of dangers and mysteries, but as long as they had each other, they would keep fighting. For now, though, they could rest. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon, the team walked forward, leaving the ruins of an ancient world behind, knowing that they had done what needed to be done. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The void of space stretched out before them, an infinite black canvas dotted with distant stars. Jenna Cole, commander of the Avengers, stood at the bridge of the Resolute, staring into the abyss. They were far beyond the reaches of charted space, skimming the very edge of the galaxy. Out here, the laws of physics seemed to twist, time slowed, and even light took longer to travel. Jenna took a deep breath, her gaze hard as she tried to shake the unease that had settled over her. Approaching the coordinates now, Commander, Cassian Dre's voice crackled through the comm. His hands danced across the controls, steady as always. Jenna trusted Cassian with her life. He was the best pilot she'd ever flown with, his instincts honed from years of navigating the galaxy's most treacherous sectors. The ship's engines hummed beneath their feet as the Resolute drifted closer to their destination. Any signs of life? Jenna asked, her voice calm but edged with tension. Dr. Victor Kane, the team's resident genius and engineer, peered at the readouts. His brow furrowed as he adjusted his glasses, the blue glow of the console reflecting off his face. Nothing yet. Whatever civilization used to be here is long gone. But the energy readings are off the charts. If what we've heard is true, this place could be a game changer. Jenna nodded, though she wasn't sure if she wanted to believe the rumors. An alien civilization, lost to time, with technology capable of altering the very fabric of the universe? It sounded like a legend, but the information had come from reliable sources, as reliable as they came on the galactic fringes. It was worth investigating, even if the dangers loomed large. As the Resolute passed through a swirling nebula, the planet came into view. It was a barren, rocky world, cloaked in swirling clouds of dust and debris. A forgotten place, far removed from the bustling center of the galaxy. Yet something about it felt wrong, as though the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting. Lyra, ready the team for landing, Jenna ordered, her voice firm. Lyra Sykes, the team's combat specialist, nodded and strode out of the bridge. She moved with the grace of a seasoned warrior, every step calculated, her piercing eyes always scanning for danger. Lyra had been with Jenna for years, her loyalty unquestionably, at least, that's what Jenna believed. The Resolute descended toward the planet's surface, its landing gears deploying with a soft hiss as they touched down. Outside, the landscape was a wasteland of jagged rocks and desolation, the sky an angry swirl of purple and gray. Dust clouds whipped across the ground, carried by fierce winds that howled like specters of the past. The Avengers exited the ship, their boots crunching against the hard, cracked earth. Jenna scanned the horizon through her visor, but there was little to see beyond the ruins that lay scattered across the landscape. Massive stone structures crumbled into heaps, their original purpose long forgotten. It was a graveyard of a once great civilization. "Victor, you're up," Jenna said, motioning toward the largest structure, a towering edifice with strange symbols etched into its surface. The building was eerily intact compared to the others, its walls radiating a faint, otherworldly glow. Victor moved forward, running his handheld scanner along the structure's surface. "These readings area broken bar unbelievable. The energy here is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's old, ancient even, but still active. We need to proceed with caution." "Doesn't look like there's anyone left to worry about," Cashin muttered, kicking a small pile of dust with his boot. "Dead for millennia, maybe longer." "Maybe, but I've got a bad feeling about this," Lyra said, her voice low, almost as if she was speaking to herself. Jenna glanced at her, catching the flicker of something in her expression, but Lyra quickly masked it, her gaze hardening once more. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the energy readings grew stronger. The air felt charged, like the crackle before a storm. Victor's scanner beeped wildly as they approached the central chamber of the structure. The walls were covered in more symbols, spiraling patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer under the dim light. And there, in the center of the room, lay the quantum nexus. It was smaller than Jenna had imagined, almost unassuming, a floating, crystalline sphere suspended in a delicate web of light and energy. But the power radiating from it was unmistakable. It pulsed, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the universe itself. "This is it," Victor breathed, his eyes wide with awe. "This is what we came for." Jenna stepped forward, but just as she reached out toward the nexus, the ground trembled beneath her feet. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. "Commander!" Lyra shouted, drawing her weapon as shadows moved at the edges of the room. They weren't alone. From the darkness emerged Zerkthane, the former warlord, once feared across the galaxy, stood before them, his face a mask of cold, ruthless determination. His body was covered in armor, sleek and menacing, augmented with advanced tech that gleamed under the dim light of the Nexus. "Ah, the Avengers!" Zerk's voice was smooth, laced with malice. "How predictable that you'd come for the Nexus. But you're too late. This power-broken bar, it's already mine." Jenna's heart pounded as she raised her weapon, her voice steady despite the dread creeping through her. "Zerk, I thought we left you rotting in that prison cell." "You left me to die, but death is just the beginning," Zerk replied, stepping closer to the Nexus. "This technology will allow me to reshape the galaxy as I see fit. The weak will perish, and the stronger, those like me, will rule for eternity." "Not if we stop you," Lyra growled, her eyes narrowing as she aimed her rifle at his chest. Zerk chuckled, his gaze shifting between Jenna and Lyra. "You think you can stop me? You don't even understand the power you're dealing with." Without warning, Zerk raised his hand, and the Nexus pulsed with a blinding light. Jenna's body seized up as the air around her seemed to warp and shift. Time itself bent, stretching and twisting in ways that defied comprehension. In a single moment, she felt as though she had lived 1,000 lives, each one unraveling before her eyes, only to be reset the next second. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight of the Nexus's power hanging heavy in the air. Jenna staggered back, her vision swimming. "What a broken bar! What did you do?" Zerk smirked, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of control. "A demonstration, nothing more. A taste of what's to come if you don't leave now. This technology is beyond you, beyond any of you. Only I can wield it. Victor stumbled forward, clutching his head. Jenna, he's right. This technology a broken bar, it's unstable. The more he uses it, the more reality itself begins to unravel. We can't let him keep it, Jenna said, gritting her teeth as she steadied herself. We have to stop him before it's too late. You're welcome to try, Zrick sneered, turning away from them, but I've already won. Jenna's heart raced as Zrick turned his back on them, the Nexus pulsing faintly in response to his presence. The weight of the situation pressed on her chest like a vice. The balance of the entire universe teetered on the edge, and she wasn't about to let a madman decide its fate. With a quick hand signal, she motioned for the team to move into position. Lyra took cover behind a fallen pillar, her rifle trained on Zrick, while Cashin and Victor flanked him, careful to avoid the tendrils of light radiating from the Nexus. Jenna's voice was a low growl in her comms. Victor, how do we shut it down? Victor's hands trembled slightly as he examined his datapad, the complex energy readings overwhelming even his vast knowledge. It's a broken bar difficult. The Nexus is tied into the fabric of reality itself. We can't just shut it off, we have to sever Zrick's connection to it. Jenna cursed under her breath. Of course that wouldn't be simple. Nothing ever was. She could feel time slipping away, each second pushing them closer to catastrophe. Zrick, meanwhile, was lost in his own world, his eyes glowing with the energy of the Nexus. He murmured to himself, a strange, guttural language that made the hairs on the back of Jenna's neck stand on end. He was communing with the Nexus, shaping it, bending it to his will. Without warning, Lyra took the shot. A single, high-energy bolt flew across the chamber, aimed directly at Zerg's chest. But the moment it touched the invisible field around him, it fizzled out, disintegrating into nothing. Zerg didn't even flinch. Instead, he turned slowly, his cold gaze falling on Lyra. You think you can challenge me? Zerg's voice was laced with mockery. He raised his hand, and before anyone could react, a wave of energy erupted from him, sending Lyra flying backward into the far wall with a sickening thud. Lyra, Jenna shouted, sprinting toward her fallen comrade. She dropped to her knees beside Lyra's crumpled form, relief washing over her when she saw Lyra still breathing, though barely conscious. Blood trickled from a wound on her forehead, but Lyra's eyes flickered open. Commander Broken Bar, Lyra whispered, her voice weak. Me Broken Bar, sorry, your Broken Bar. Save your strength, Jenna muttered, her voice tight with anger. She stood, fists clenched, turning her attention back to Zrick. You bastard, a Broken Bar. Zrick smirked. You're out of your depth, Commander Cole. The Nexus isn't something you can fight with brute force. It bends reality. It's already begun reshaping the universe, piece by piece. Jenna's mind raced. They couldn't take him head on, not while he was connected to the Nexus. Victor's words echoed in her ears. Sever his connection to it. But how? How could they break Zrick's control over something so powerful? Suddenly, Victor's voice crackled through her comms. Jenna, I think I know how to do it. The Nexus has a core, a central point that controls its connection to the user. If I can get to it, I might be able to disconnect Zrick. With a Broken Bar, it's risky. If I make one mistake, it could destabilize the entire structure. Jenna didn't hesitate. Do it. Victor nodded, his expression grim. He moved toward the Nexus, keeping low to avoid Zerg's attention. Jenna could see the strain on his face as he got closer, the energy pulsing around him in chaotic waves. It was like standing in the heart of a storm, with reality itself warping and shifting unpredictably. Zrick, meanwhile, seemed unaware of Victor's approach. He was too focused on his newfound power, his hands raised toward the Nexus as he muttered in that strange language again. Jenna knew they had only moments before he fully activated whatever plan he had in mind. Cashin, cover Victor, Jenna ordered, and Cashin was already moving, his blaster trained on Zrick, ready to distract him if necessary. Victor reached the base of the Nexus, his fingers working furiously on his datapad as he tried to interface with the alien technology. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he typed, each keystroke feeling like a race against time. Jenna kept her eyes on Zrick, ready for anything. But the moment stretched on, each second an eternity. Then, Victor's voice came through her earpiece, breathless but triumphant. "I've got it, I'm in." But before Jenna could respond, Zrick's eyes snapped open, and he turned, his expression murderous. "You think you can stop me?" he roared, his voice booming through the chamber. He raised his hands, and the air around the Nexus crackled with energy. Jenna's heart lurched as she realized what Zrick was about to do. He was going to use the Nexus to obliterate them all. "Victor!" she screamed. "Do it now!" Victor didn't need to be told twice. With a final keystroke, he severed the connection. The effect was immediate. The Nexus pulsed violently, the light dimming for a brief moment before surging back with an intense, blinding flare. Zrick let out a scream of rage as the power he'd been siphoning from the Nexus was ripped away from him. His body convulsed, his armor sparking and crackling as the feedback from the severed connection coursed through him. Jenna shielded her eyes from the blinding light, her ears ringing from the force of Zrick's scream. When the light finally faded, she blinked, her vision clearing just in time to see Zrick collapse to his knees, smoke rising from his armor. For a moment, there was only silence. Jenna approached Zrick cautiously, her weapon trained on him. His once powerful form was now crumpled, broken, his face contorted in pain and disbelief. The power of the Nexus had been stripped from him, leaving him a mere shell of the warlord he once was. "It's over, Zrick," Jenna said, her voice cold. "You've lost." Zrick's eyes flickered up to meet hers, filled with hatred and despair. "You think you've won?" he rasped, his voice weak. "The Nexuser broken bar can't be destroyed. You've only delayed the inevitable. Someone else will come for a broken bar, and when they do, the galaxy will burn." Jenna's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. She knew Zrick was right. The Nexus was too powerful to simply be forgotten. Its existence was a threat, a temptation that could not be left unchecked. But for now, at least, the immediate danger had passed. "Get him out of here," Jenna ordered Cashin, who stepped forward to restrain the defeated warlord. Victor approached, looking exhausted but relieved. "It's done. Zrick's connection to the Nexus is severed. But we still need to figure out what to do with it." Jenna nodded, her gaze shifting to the floating, crystalline sphere at the heart of the chamber. It was still there, still pulsing with that same steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the universe itself. The temptation to reach out and claim its power was almost overwhelming, but Jenna knew better. No one should have that kind of power, and not Zrick, not the Avengers, not anyone. "We destroy it," Jenna said finally, her voice resolute. "Completely." Victor hesitated, glancing at the Nexus. "Are you sure?" "This technology could change everything. It could end wars, cure diseases, or it could tear the galaxy apart," Jenna interrupted. "We've seen what it can do. It's too dangerous to be left in anyone's hands." Victor sighed but nodded in agreement. "You're right. I'll rig the core to overload. Once we're clear, the entire structure will implode." Jenna watched as Victor began setting up the detonation sequence. The Nexus pulsed softly, almost as if it knew what was about to happen. She turned away, her heart heavy but her resolve unwavering. As they made their way back to the Resolute, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Zrick's warning echoed in her mind. Someone else would come for the Nexus, and when they did, the fight would begin anew. But for now, they had won, and that was enough. The Avengers boarded their ship, leaving the Nexus and its dangerous secrets behind. As the Resolute lifted off, Jenna watched from the viewport as the ruins below began to crumble, consumed by the energy of the imploding Nexus. In a matter of moments, the entire structure was gone, reduced to nothing more than dust and debris. Jenna closed her eyes, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. For now, the galaxy was safe. But deep down, She knew the battle for its future was far from over. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The stars stretched endlessly across the vast, cold reaches of space, but Earth no longer saw the beauty in them. Threats from the unknown galaxies had grown more frequent, and even Earth's greatest hero, the Avengers, were being pushed to their limits. They had faced unimaginable odds before, but now the game had changed. What once seemed like isolated alien incursions had turned into a terrifying galactic pattern. Earth's leaders had convened in an emergency summit, desperately seeking a solution. Titan Shield, standing tall with his signature circular weapon strapped to his back, scanned the worried faces of those gathered in the room. Heads of state, military leaders, even heads of interplanetary research. They all had the same look. Fear. And in their fear, Titan Shield saw an opportunity. "We can't do this alone anymore," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of his words. "Earth isn't the only target. Alien species are facing similar threats. We need to reach out, to unite with them." Iron Commander, his armor gleaming under the dim lights, nodded in agreement. "He's right. This isn't just about defending Earth. This is about ensuring that no one else falls under these invasions. We need to build something bigger, an alliance that spans across galaxies." The proposal was radical. The Avengers had always worked as a small, tight-knit group. Even when the stakes were at their highest, they had relied on their teamwork and unique abilities to see them through. But this time, it was different. The galaxy itself was unraveling. Reports of Creel warships bombarding planets, Zarlan technological forces overwhelming colonies, and the mysterious Nivans manipulating events from the shadows were becoming too frequent to ignore. The Galactic Council meeting was held on Argon 7, a neutral planet far from the core territories of any species. It was a place of delicate diplomacy, a world chosen specifically because no one could claim it as their own. The Avengers, for the first time, found themselves standing among the most powerful alien leaders in the galaxy. Titan Shield looked around the council chamber. The Creel leader, General Vrick, was an imposing figure, his body lined with battle scars, his voice like gravel grinding underfoot. The Zarlan diplomat, Kaldar, sat to his left, every movement deliberate, calculating, as if weighing the potential of every word spoken in the room. Then there were the Nivans, silent, watching, and shrouded in dark robes that barely revealed their faces. Of all the alien races, they were the most secretive, their motives always hidden behind a veil of mystery. Titan Shield spoke first, standing in the center of the chamber. "Our worlds are under threat. Earth may have been the first to notice, but we're not the only target. The invasions are growing, and unless we unite, none of our planets will survive." General Vrick sneered, his heavy brow furrowing. "The Creel do not need help from weaker races. We've fought for eons, crushed our enemies, and expanded our empire. We will continue to do so." Before Titan Shield could respond, Iron Commander cut in, his voice modulated by his helmet speaker. "Then ask yourself why your enemies are still out there. If your empire was so unstoppable, we wouldn't be having this meeting. But here you are, sitting with the rest of us. That tells me even the mighty Creel are having their problems." Vrick's eyes flashed with fury, but he said nothing. It was clear the Creel warrior's pride had been wounded, but the truth in Iron Commander's words couldn't be denied. Titan Shield seized the moment, appealing to the others. "We aren't asking you to sacrifice your independence. We're asking you to form an alliance, to pool our strengths against a common enemy. Together, we can stand against any threat." The Nivans remained silent, their inscrutable faces impossible to read. Kaldar, however, leaned forward, his calculating mind already working through the possibilities. "And who," Kaldar asked, "will lead this alliance?" "We Zarlans will not take orders from others. We are the most advanced species here, and we do not intend to put our fate in the hands of humans." Before the discussion could devolve into bickering, Scarlet Vanguard, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the room, spoke. Her words were soft but carried an undeniable power. No one leads the Alliance. We lead together, or we fall apart. Her words resonated with the Council. It was a simple truth, but a powerful one. No one wanted to admit it, but the Avengers had given them something no one else could: hope. With the seed of cooperation planted, the Galactic Council begrudgingly agreed to form the new alliance. It was a fragile agreement, one built on necessity rather than trust, but it was a start. The tension in the new alliance was palpable from the moment the first strategy meetings began. The Creel warriors openly distrusted the Zarlans, while the Nivans, ever mysterious, offered no indication of their true intentions. Even within the Avengers, there was a growing concern about whether this alliance could hold together. Still, they pressed on, organizing joint operations and defense initiatives. Titan Shield found himself acting more as a diplomat than a warrior, constantly mediating disputes between the different species. In one instance, a skirmish nearly broke out between Creel and Zarlan troops during a training exercise. The Creel accused the Zarlans of sabotaging their equipment, while the Zarlans countered that the Creel were deliberately provoking them. Scarlet Vanguard stepped in, using her abilities to reveal that it had been a simple mechanical malfunction and no sabotage, no ill intent. But even with the misunderstanding cleared, the tensions remained high. Meanwhile, Iron Commander took on the role of strategist, designing battle plans and defense grids for the new alliance. He found the Zarlans' technological prowess impressive, but their reluctance to share information was a constant source of frustration. The Creel, on the other hand, were too proud to follow orders from anyone they didn't consider their equal. In spite of these obstacles, the new alliance managed to organize its first defense mission. The Gyarns, a hostile race known for their brutal raids, had been spotted on the outskirts of the new alliance's territory. It was the perfect opportunity to test the newly formed alliance in battle. The mission was a disaster from the start. The Creel refused to follow the Zarlan commander's strategy, opting instead for their own head-on assault. The Zarlans, in turn, pulled their forces back, leaving the Creel vulnerable. Scarlet Vanguard had to use her abilities to create a force field, saving the Creel from complete annihilation. But the damage was done. The Creel blamed the Zarlans for abandoning them, and the Zarlans accused the Creel of recklessness. Titan Shield stood at the center of the battlefield, his shield bloodied from the fighting. "This can't go on," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we don't find a way to work together, we're finished." But even as he spoke, he wondered if it was already too late. The aftermath of the battle left the new alliance in disarray. The Creel were furious, the Zarlans distrustful, and the Nivans silent. They offered no comment on the failed mission, merely observing from the shadows. Iron Commander, never one to back down from a challenge, spent sleepless nights reviewing battle footage, trying to figure out what went wrong. But deep down, he knew the problem wasn't tactical. It was something far more dangerous: division. "Unity is what we need," he said to Titan Shield in the dim light of the command center. "But it's the one thing we don't have." Titan Shield, staring out at the stars beyond, nodded. "And without it, this alliance will tear itself apart." But before they could come up with a solution, a new threat emerged, one that none of them could have predicted. Iron Commander received a transmission from an old network of informants he had set up across the galaxy. The Gyarns weren't acting on their own. They were being manipulated, controlled by an unseen force. A name surfaced from the depths of galactic history: Govar, an ancient entity who had once attempted to conquer the galaxy by pitting species against each other, exploiting their fears and prejudices. Now, it seemed, Govar had returned, using the Gyarns to sow discord within the new alliance. Iron Commander stared at the transmission, the cryptic information gnawing at his mind. Govar was a name he hadn't heard in Yrsa legend, more than anything. But now, it was clear that the entity wasn't just a myth. The threat was very real. He immediately summoned the Avengers. Titan Shield arrived first, his brow furrowed in thought. Scarlet Vanguard followed close behind, her face a mask of calm, though the glow in her eyes betrayed her growing unease. Iron Commander relayed the news swiftly, outlining the details of the Gyron attacks and Govar's involvement. "We're dealing with someone who knows how to manipulate entire civilizations," Iron Commander said, pacing in front of the holographic map of the galaxy. "Govar has done this before. If we don't stop him now, this alliance will crumble." Titan Shield crossed his arms, his expression grim. "Then we need to act fast. The new alliance is hanging by a thread, and Govar is pulling at every loose end. If he keeps this up, we'll be fighting each other instead of him." "But how do we convince the others that this is real?" Scarlet Vanguard asked, her voice steady. "The Creel barely trust us as it is. The Zarlans are too arrogant to take warnings from anyone, and the Nivns a broken bar. Well, we still don't know what they want." Iron Commander nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "We don't need them to trust us. We just need them to see the threat for themselves." The Avengers devised a plan. They would lead a covert mission to track down Govar's operations and gather undeniable proof of his interference. Once they had something concrete, the alien leaders would have no choice but to unite against him. The mission took them to the outer edges of New Alliance space, where Iron Commander had identified potential strongholds connected to Govar. The team worked in the shadows, avoiding detection as they infiltrated a remote Gyron outpost. The tension was palpable as they moved through the desolate complex, the eerie silence pressing down on them. Scarlet Vanguard's senses tingled with every step, her fingers ready to unleash her powers at the slightest sign of danger. Titan Shield led the way, his shield strapped to his back, scanning for traps and enemies. Iron Commander's tech fed him constant streams of data, mapping the facility as they went. Finally, they reached the central chamber, a dark, cavernous space filled with alien technology that hummed with energy. In the center, a massive holographic display showed images of the galaxy, with marked points indicating recent conflicts. It was a map of chaos, and Govar was the puppet master behind it all. "Iron Commander," Titan Shield whispered. "Look!" In the corner of the room, a figure stood, a tall, gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. Govar. He seemed to sense their presence immediately, turning his gaze toward them with a slow, deliberate movement. "So, the famous Avengers finally come to play," Govar said, his voice smooth but dripping with malice. "You're too late. The Alliance is already doomed." Titan Shield stepped forward, shield raised. "Not if we stop you first." Govar chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You can't stop me. I've been playing this game for centuries, long before your little alliance even existed. You think you can unite these races? They'll tear each other apart before they ever stand together." Iron Commander's eyes narrowed behind his helmet. "We'll see about that." In a flash, the battle began. Govar moved with unnatural speed, his powers warping reality around him. He sent blasts of energy toward the Avengers, forcing them to dodge and counterattack. Scarlet Vanguard unleashed her own powers, creating a shimmering barrier that deflected Govar's strikes, while Titan Shield charged forward, using his shield to block a volley of dark energy. Govar's laughter echoed through the chamber as he manipulated the battlefield, his control over space and time making it difficult for the Avengers to land a decisive blow. But Iron Commander, always thinking ahead, had anticipated Govar's tactics. He activated a series of devices he had planted around the room, disrupting Govar's control and forcing him to fight on more even terms. With a coordinated strike, the Avengers pressed their advantage. Scarlet Vanguard used her powers to destabilize Govar's connection to the surrounding energy, while Titan Shield delivered powerful blows that weakened Govar's defenses. Iron Commander, using his advanced tech, locked onto Govar's weakest points and unleashed a barrage of precision attacks. For the first time, Govar faltered. "You a broken bar can't a broken bar win," Govar growled, his voice losing its once confident edge. "They'll never trust each other. A broken bar, never a broken bar." Titan Shield, breathing heavily, stepped forward, his shield at the ready. Maybe not, but we'll give them something to believe in. With one final, coordinated effort, the Avengers struck together. Titan Shield slammed his shield into Kovar's chest, while Scarlet Vanguard unleashed a surge of energy that tore through his defenses. Iron Commander delivered the final blow, a pulse of energy that sent Kovar crashing to the ground. The chamber fell silent. Kovar, weakened and defeated, lay motionless on the floor. The Avengers stood over him, victorious, but knowing their work was far from over. Iron Commander scanned the room, quickly downloading the data from Kovar's systems. We've got the proof we need. Let's get back to the Council. The journey back to the Galactic Council felt longer than ever. The new alliance was on the brink of collapse, and the Avengers knew that without their evidence, there was little hope of holding it together. As they approached the Council chamber, the tension in the air was palpable. General Vrick stood at the center, his face twisted in fury as he argued with Kaldor. The Nivans watched from the shadows, as silent as ever. The council was falling apart before their eyes. Titan Shield stepped forward, his voice booming through the hall. Enough! The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the Avengers. Iron Commander stepped up beside Titan Shield, holding up a data drive. We have the proof. Kovar has been manipulating all of USA, playing us against each other. But we stopped him. And now, you need to decide. Will you let his plans destroy everything we've built, or will you stand together and fight? The council was silent for a long moment. Vrick's eyes shifted from the Avengers to the other alien leaders, his pride warring with the truth laid before him. Finally, he spoke. The Creel will fight for the Alliance. Kaldor, ever calculating, nodded, as will the Zarlans. The Nivans, their voices a whisper in the air, spoke in unison. We are with you. The new alliance, once on the verge of collapse, had been saved. The threat of Kovar was over, but new challenges lay ahead. The Avengers had done what they always did: stood tall in the face of insurmountable odds and found a way to bring people together. As they left the council chamber, Titan Shield glanced at his teammates. This is just the beginning. Iron Commander nodded, his helmet retracting as he looked out at the stars. It always is. Scarlet Vanguard smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. But this time, we're not alone. The new alliance had been forged in fire, and now, together, they would face whatever came next. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The city skyline gleamed in the early morning light, a symbol of humanity's progress and resilience. The Avengers, Earth's mightiest protectors, had just completed a routine patrol. There hadn't been a serious threat for weeks, and while some took comfort in the lull, others felt a sense of unease. Peace, for them, often meant the calm before a storm. Captain Ethan Cole, leader of the Avengers, stood on the balcony of their tower headquarters, watching the sun rise. Beside him, Mia Santiago, known for her mystic abilities, meditated in silence, sensing the energies that flowed through the city. Below, the streets were bustling with life, unaware of the shadows that loomed just beyond the horizon. Something's coming, Mia whispered, her eyes narrowing. Ethan glanced at her, his brow furrowing. You sense something? Mia nodded slowly. It's faint, but it's there, a disturbance in the energy, something dark, ancient, and malevolent. Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A shock wave rippled through the city, and in the distance, a plume of dark smoke spiraled into the sky. Without hesitation, the Avengers mobilized. Within moments, they were on their way to the source of the explosion, the tension between them palpable. Arriving at the scene, they found chaos. Buildings were reduced to rubble, streets cracked open, and civilians ran in all directions, panic etched on their faces. In the center of the destruction stood three figures, once their friends, now twisted versions of themselves. David Jensen, the team's tech genius, was the first to recognize them. Is that Alex, Julia, and Marcus? His voice wavered as he stared at the dark, corrupted versions of his teammates. Alex, once the embodiment of strength and courage, now stood as a hulking figure of pure malice, his eyes glowing with an unnatural red hue. Julia, whose speed and agility were unmatched, moved with a predatory grace, her once bright aura now replaced by shadows that clung to her like a second skin. And Marcus, the calm strategist, radiated a dark energy that pulsed with malevolent intent. "There. Different," Ethan muttered, gripping his shield tighter. "Corrupted," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it." Something Asamiania has twisted them into these dark versions of themselves. Without warning, the corrupted Avengers attacked. Alex charged forward, his strength amplified beyond recognition. He slammed into Ethan, sending him flying across the street and crashing into a car. Julia darted toward David, her movements a blur as she delivered a series of rapid, brutal strikes. Marcus, with a wave of his hand, unleashed a wave of dark energy that shattered the ground beneath Mia, forcing her to conjure a protective shield to avoid being crushed. "Pull back," Ethan shouted as he struggled to his feet. "We need to regroup." The Avengers retreated, their hearts heavy with the realization that their former comrades were now their enemies. As they regrouped in a nearby alley, Mia's hands trembled. "I've never felt power like this," she admitted. "It's ancient, dark, and overwhelming." "Whatever's controlling them. It's not of this world." "We need to figure out what happened," Ethan said, his voice firm despite the weight of the situation. "David, can you get us any data on that energy signature?" David, nursing a bruise on his cheek, nodded and began tapping away on his portable device. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, gathering information as quickly as he could. "There's a trace of an unknown energy signature, but it's mixed with something else. Something technological. It's a blend of magic and science." Mia's eyes widened. "That's why it feels so foreign." "It's not just magic, it's something more. We're dealing with an enemy that knows both sides of the equation." Ethan clenched his jaw. "We need to find out who's behind this." But before they could come up with a plan, the ground shook again. The corrupted Avengers were on the move, wreaking havoc on the city, and the Avengers knew they couldn't wait any longer. The battle stretched into the evening as the Avengers tried to contain their former teammates, but every attack, every strategy, seemed to fall short. The corrupted Avengers were stronger, faster, and more ruthless than ever before. Their knowledge of the Avengers' strengths and weaknesses made them nearly unstoppable. As night fell, the Avengers found themselves at a crossroads. They had barely managed to keep the corrupted Avengers at bay, but they couldn't hold them off forever. Ethan paced back and forth, his frustration mounting. "We're out of options. We can't keep fighting them like this." Mia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, meditated, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've been searching the energies. I think I've found something. There's a trail faint, but it's there. If we follow it, we might be able to find the source of the corruption." David nodded. "If we can get to the source, maybe we can reverse the process and bring them back." The decision was made. The Avengers would follow the trail, hoping to find the mastermind behind the attack and a way to save their friends. But as they prepared to leave, the city was rocked by another explosion. The corrupted Avengers had taken their destructive rampage to a new level, targeting the city's power grid. Darkness spread across the skyline as the lights went out, plunging the city into chaos. Ethan's heart sank. "We don't have much time." With Mia leading the way, they followed the energy trail through the darkened streets, moving swiftly and silently. The trail led them to an old, abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, hidden beneath layers of enchantments and cloaking technology. It was a fortress, protected by magic and science, blending the two in ways the Avengers had never seen before. "This is it," Mia whispered, her voice filled with both awe and dread. "The source of the corruption is here." As they entered the factory, they were met with a labyrinth of corridors, each one more foreboding than the last. The walls pulsed with dark energy, and the air was thick with malevolent intent. The deeper they went, the more they could feel the weight of the power that had corrupted their friends. Finally, They reached the heart of the Factoria, a vast chamber filled with machines that hummed with dark energy. At the center of it all stood a figure cloaked in shadow, their face obscured but their presence undeniable. The mastermind behind the attack. "I've been expecting you," the figure said, their voice dripping with malice. "Did you really think you could stop me?" Ethan stepped forward, his shield raised. "We'll do whatever it takes to stop you and free our friends." The figure chuckled darkly. "Your friends are beyond saving. They belong to me now, and soon, so will the rest of your precious Earth." Mia, her hands glowing with magic, stepped beside Ethan. "We'll see about that." The dark figure's words hung in the air, their voice filled with confidence and contempt. Ethan could feel the tension mounting, but he kept his stance firm, gripping his shield tighter. Mia's hands crackled with energy, her magic ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. David remained in the background, his eyes scanning the dark machinery, looking for any weakness in the system. "We've faced worse than you," Ethan said calmly, his voice steady. "Whatever power you have over our friends, we'll break it." The figure tilted their head slightly, as if amused by the defiance. "You think this is about power? This is about vengeance, Captain. Your friends aren't fighting for me, they're fighting because they've realized the truth. They've seen the world for what it really is. They know now that you've been holding them back." At that moment, the doors behind them slammed shut, sealing the Avengers inside the chamber. From the shadows, the corrupted Avengers emerged, their eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. Alex, Julia, and Marcus stepped forward, their movements eerily synchronized, as though they were one mind, one dark force. "You can't win this fight," the figure continued, their voice echoing through the chamber. "Not when your enemies know your every move. They are you, and you are them. The longer you resist, the more you doom yourselves." Ethan swallowed the knot in his throat. He didn't want to believe it, but the truth was undeniable. His friends, his teammates, were lost to this darkness, and they fought with an intimate knowledge of his team's strategies. But there had to be a way to break through to them, to remind them of who they really were. Mia's voice was low, almost inaudible. "They're still in there. I can feel it. Their real selves are trapped beneath the corruption." Ethan nodded. "Then we hold them off until we can bring them back." With that, the battle erupted. Alex charged forward with his usual brute strength, but it was amplified now, more vicious, more focused. Ethan barely had time to block the oncoming blow, his shield vibrating under the impact. David scrambled to take cover, his tech skills no match for Julia's speed, as she darted toward him in a blur. Mia unleashed a wave of energy to keep Marcus at bay, but his dark power pushed against her defenses, cracking the ground beneath their feet. The room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the fight. Sparks flew from shattered machinery, and the air was thick with the sound of clashing powers and the grunts of battle. Ethan fought with everything he had, but for every strike he landed, Alex retaliated with twice the force. Julia's speed was overwhelming, and David was barely able to dodge her flurry of attacks, trying to come up with a solution that didn't involve harming his friend. It was Mia who saw the opening first. Amid the chaos, she noticed the faint flicker in Marcus's eye. A hesitation, a sliver of doubt. It was brief, but it was there, a sign that he was still fighting the dark force inside him. She focused her energy, sending a pulse of light toward him, hoping to exploit that moment of weakness. The light hit Marcus squarely in the chest, and for a split second, his dark aura faltered. He stumbled back, clutching his head, as though battling the darkness that had taken hold of him. "Marcus!" Mia called out, her voice desperate. "You're stronger than this. Fight it!" But the dark figure was quick to react. With a wave of their hand, Marcus's eyes glazed over once more, and he resumed his attack, the moment of clarity lost. Mia cursed under her breath, her frustration mounting. It was clear now that this was more than just a battle of strength. They needed to break the connection between the mastermind and their friends. Otherwise, they would be trapped in this endless loop, fighting their own teammates forever. David, who had been dodging Julia's relentless strikes, suddenly had an idea. He ducked behind a piece of debris, his fingers flying across the small console he had managed to pull from his belt. He was scanning the dark energy signatures, comparing them with the text signatures in the room. His eyes lit up as he found what he was looking for, an energy node embedded in the machinery at the far end of the chamber. "Ethan!" David shouted, his voice strained. "There's the control node near the back of the room. If we can destroy it, we might be able to sever the connection." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Cover me!" Mia and David unleashed everything they had, their combined magic and tech creating a barrage of attacks to distract the corrupted Avengers. Ethan charged toward the node, ducking and weaving between strikes, using every ounce of his skill and reflexes to avoid the onslaught. As he reached the node, he raised his shield high and brought it down with all his might. The impact was explosive. The node shattered, sending a wave of energy rippling through the chamber. The dark core surrounding the corrupted Avengers flickered, and for the first time since the battle began, there was a moment of stillness. Alex, Julia, and Marcus paused, their eyes wide, as though waking from a deep nightmare. They blinked, confusion and pain crossing their faces as they looked around the room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But the victory was short-lived. The dark figure, now fully visible and standing at the center of the chamber, let out a low, menacing laugh. "You think you've won?" This was only the beginning. With a flick of their wrist, the ground beneath them trembled once more. From the shattered machinery, dark tendrils of energy erupted, wrapping around Alex, Julia, and Marcus, pulling them toward the figure. Their bodies convulsed as the dark power surged through them again, stronger than before. The figure raised their hands, and the energy intensified, twisting and warping the corrupted Avengers even further. "No!" Ethan shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. The corrupted Avengers were lifted off the ground, their bodies completely engulfed by the dark energy. When they landed, they were no longer the same. Their forms had changed, their powers amplified to terrifying levels. They were no longer merely corrupted, they had become avatars of pure darkness, under the complete control of the mastermind. The figure's voice echoed through the chamber. "Now, you face my true power. And this time, there will be no escape." Ethan stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. His friends were gone, lost to the darkness. But he wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet." "Mia, David," he said, his voice low and steady. "We take them down together." The battle resumed with a fury unlike anything they had faced before. Alex, Julia, and Marcus were relentless, their attacks infused with the dark energy that radiated from the figure at the center. Every blow sent shock waves through the room, and every strike the Avengers landed seemed to be absorbed by the dark power that now controlled their friends. But Ethan refused to back down. He fought with everything he had, pushing his body to the limit, his mind focused on one goal: breaking through the darkness and bringing his friends back. Mia and David fought by his side, their own exhaustion forgotten as they poured every ounce of their strength into the fight. It was Mia who finally saw the opportunity. Amid the chaos, she had been watching the flow of dark energy, studying its movements. She realized that the dark figure wasn't just controlling the corrupted Avengers, they were drawing power from them. If they could sever that connection, they might be able to weaken the figure enough to take them down. "Mia!" David shouted as he struggled to fend off Julia's attacks. "Do it now!" Mia didn't hesitate. She gathered all the energy she had left, focusing it into a single point, and then released it in a blinding wave of light. The light surged through the chamber, cutting through the dark tendrils that connected the figure to the corrupted Avengers. For the first time, the dark figure recoiled, their control over the corrupted Avengers weakening. Alex, Julia, and Marcus faltered, their dark forms flickering as the connection was broken. Ethan seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful blow to the figure, his shield crackling with energy as it struck. The dark figure let out a scream of rage and pain as the connection was severed completely. The corrupted Avengers collapsed to the ground, the dark energy dissipating from their bodies. They were free. But the fight wasn't over. The dark figure, though weakened, wasn't defeated yet. They raised their hands, summoning one final surge of power, ready to unleash it upon the Avengers. But before they could, Mia, David, and Ethan combined their remaining strength, launching a coordinated attack that overwhelmed the figure. The dark energy shattered, and the figure collapsed, defeated. The chamber fell silent, the dark energy slowly dissipating into the air. The battle was over. Ethan, breathing heavily, looked around at his team. Alex, Julia, and Marcus were slowly regaining consciousness, their faces filled with confusion and pain, but they were themselves again. The darkness had been lifted. "We did it," Mia whispered, her voice filled with exhaustion and relief. Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of hope. They had won, but the scars of the battle would remain. Their friends were free, but the cost had been high. As they helped their teammates to their feet, Ethan glanced at the now empty space where the dark figure had once stood. He knew this wasn't the end. The forces that had manipulated them were still out there, waiting in the shadows. But for now, they had a moment of peace, and they would rebuild, stronger than before. The Avengers had faced the darkness and they had emerged victorious. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the year 2079, politics had become a game of skill, wit, and virtual reality. The election for the next president of the United States was no longer just a battle of policies but a war fought on two fronts, a real and virtual. The virtual arena, as it was called, became a battleground where candidates would face simulations that tested their leadership, strategy, and crisis management. Every citizen of voting age was logged into the VR platform, watching the candidates in real time as they made their choices. This was democracy in the digital age. Ethan Cruz, a former senator from California, was one of the leading candidates for the presidency. Known for his integrity and pragmatic approach, he had always believed in transparency and honesty, something he felt was sorely lacking in politics. His virtual avatar, Sentinel, stood as a towering figure of strength, confidence, and wisdom. It had been designed to reflect Ethan's calm under pressure and ability to adapt to any situation, a perfect match for his leadership style. With less than a month until Election Day, Ethan knew the stakes were higher than ever. "Sir, the polls are tightening," Sarah Holt, his campaign manager, said as she entered the room. Her tone was clipped, professional, and filled with the same urgency she always carried. Ethan looked up from his VR headset, blinking as he adjusted back to reality. "I figured as much," Ethan replied, running a hand through his dark hair. He had just finished a disaster management simulation where Sentinel had successfully led a virtual city out of an environmental catastrophe. But the numbers didn't seem to reflect his efforts. "They're pushing Lena Ramos hard," Sarah continued. "Her performance in the last economic simulation was impressive, and it's resonating with voters." Ethan nodded. His competitor, Lena Ramos, was a formidable force. She was younger, more progressive, and her ideas were bold. Her avatar, Radiance, represented the hope and unity she promised to bring to the country. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He knew Lena was talented, but the sudden surge in her polling numbers seemed unnatural, even for someone of her caliber. "Something's off," Ethan said, standing up and stretching his legs. "I don't want to sound paranoid, but doesn't it feel like the system is manipulating the outcomes?" Sarah paused, narrowing her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. In the last simulation, there was a glitch, a moment when I lost control of Sentinel for a few seconds. It was subtle, but it cost me. I've never experienced anything like that before." Sarah frowned. "That's not supposed to happen. The VR platform is designed to be flawless, especially for something as crucial as an election." "Let me look into it." Ethan trusted Sarah more than anyone else on his team. She had been by his side since his early days in politics, a tech-savvy strategist who always found a way to navigate the complexities of the digital world. If something was wrong, Sarah would find it. As the days passed, Ethan continued to compete in the virtual arena, tackling simulations that ranged from managing economic crises to handling international diplomacy. But the glitches persisted. In one scenario, Sentinel failed to respond to his commands during a crucial military operation, causing Ethan's performance score to drop. Meanwhile, Lena's avatar radiance continued to shine, her pulse soaring with each passing day. "Ethan, I think you were right," Sarah said one evening, her face pale as she stared at the data on her tablet. "There's something off about the VR system. I found traces of a hidden code buried deep in the platform's algorithms. It's manipulating the outcomes of the simulations, subtly altering how the public perceives each candidate's performance." Ethan's stomach churned. "Are you saying someone's rigging the election?" "Not just someone, it's a hacker group called the Codex. They're controlling the VR system, feeding fake data into the simulations and creating false polls to influence voters. They're pushing Lena to the top, but she doesn't know it." Ethan felt a surge of anger. The virtual arena was supposed to be a fair battleground, a way to let voters see the true capabilities of their future president. But now, it was nothing more than a tool for manipulation. "We need to expose this," Ethan said, his voice steely. "We can't let them get away with it." Sarah nodded. "Agreed, but we need to be careful. The Codex is powerful. If they realize we're onto them, they might retaliate." Ethan wasn't afraid of a fight. He'd spent his entire political career fighting against corruption, and this was no different. But he knew the stakes were higher now. If the Codex succeeded, the future of democracy itself would be in jeopardy. The next day, Ethan prepared for his next simulation, a high-stakes military conflict designed to test each candidate's ability to lead a nation through war. But this time, Ethan was ready. He and Sarah had devised a plan to track the Codex's activity within the VR system during the simulation. Nova, his eye assistant, would help him monitor the code in real time, searching for any anomalies that could point to the Codex's interference. As the simulation began, Ethan found himself in the middle of a virtual battlefield. Commanding Sentinel's military forces clashed around him. The stakes were high. This was the final simulation before Election Day, and the public would be watching closely. He knew Lena would be giving it her all, and the Codex would likely be watching for any sign of suspicion from his end. But as the battle unfolded, something unexpected happened. Lena's avatar, Radiance, suddenly paused in the middle of the fight, standing still for several seconds. Ethan watched in confusion as Radiance made a series of uncharacteristic errors, leading her forces into a disastrous retreat. "Ethan, are you seeing this?" Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. "I see it," he replied, narrowing his eyes. "What the hell is going on?" Nova's voice chimed in, calm and analytical. "Anomalies detected in the Radiance avatar's movement patterns. It appears the Codex is controlling her actions." Ethan's heart raced. Lena wasn't the enemy here, she was a pawn, just like him. The Codex had been pulling the strings all along, using the simulations to control the narrative of the election. "We need to get her out of there," Ethan said, his mind racing. "If she's not in control, this simulation is meaningless." But before he could act, the simulation abruptly ended, and the virtual arena faded into darkness. Ethan tore off his VR headset, his heart pounding. Something had gone terribly wrong. "They shut down the entire system," Sarah said, her voice laced with tension. "The Codex knows we're onto them." Ethan sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had exposed the Codex, but the election was still days away, and the hackers had more power than they realized. If they didn't act fast, the entire election could be compromised. As Ethan gathered his thoughts, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Lena. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what's happening, but I think someone's controlling my avatar. This isn't just a glitch." Ethan exhaled, his mind racing. "Lena, I know who's behind it. It's a hacker group called the Codex. They've been manipulating the simulations, rigging the entire election. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "So it's true," Lena whispered. "I thought I was losing my mind." "We need to work together," Ethan said. "If we're going to stop them, we have to expose the Codex before it's too late." Lena hesitated for a moment before replying. "Agreed. Let's bring them down." Ethan couldn't afford to waste any time. Lena's agreement to work together was the only chance they had to fight back against the Codex before it was too late. In the few days left until Election Day, they would have to act swiftly and decisively, and above all, without drawing too much attention. That night, they arranged a secret meeting in an undisclosed VR location, far from the public servers and prying eyes. The digital environment was simply a quiet virtual park, devoid of the flashy avatars or the bustling energy of campaign events. Ethan, with his familiar sentinel form, sat on a bench under the shade of a large tree. He checked his surroundings again, making sure they were secure. Lena's avatar, Radiance, appeared in the distance. As she approached, her usually radiant form now seemed dimmer, the stress of the situation evident in every step. When she sat beside him, she looked up at the sky, the glowing cityscape in the distance flickering like a mirage. "They'll be watching us," Lena said, her voice low. "I don't know how much time we have before they catch on." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing through possible strategies. "We need a way to bypass their control without them knowing. If we go straight at them, they'll shut everything down again or worse, use the simulation to destroy both of our campaigns." Nova chimed in from Ethan's earpiece, its voice analytical and calm. "A direct assault on the Codex's systems would alert them. However, it is possible to create a diversion within the VR infrastructure. This would give us time to access the core of their operation without detection." "A diversion?" Lena asked, leaning forward. "What kind of diversion?" Ethan exchanged a glance with her. "Something big enough that they won't see us coming. We can stage a public event, a debate, or a joint policy announcement, and while their attention is focused on manipulating the results, we strike at the heart of their system." Lena frowned. "If we go public together, it could look like we're teaming up against them. Voters might see it as suspicious, especially since our campaigns have been so competitive." "True," Ethan admitted. "But we have no choice. If we don't do this, we lose everything. They'll control the election, and democracy as we know it is gone." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "All right, we'll do it. But we need to make it convincing. If they even suspect we're onto them, they'll shut us down." Over the next day, their teams worked in secret to prepare for the event. Lena's campaign manager was left in the dark about the true plan, and Ethan only entrusted Sarah with the full scope of what they were attempting. The debate, framed as a final show of unity between the two leading candidates, was scheduled for the night before Election Day. The world would be watching, and so would the Codex. As the time for the debate approached, Ethan's anxiety grew. He wasn't nervous about facing Lena. He had debated her many times before, but the risk of failure hung over him like a storm cloud. If the Codex caught wind of their plan, they could destroy everything in an instant. He thought about what was at stake, and not just his campaign, but the future of free elections, the integrity of the system itself. Sarah stood beside him as he prepared for the VR debate. "We've programmed Nova with the necessary access points. Once the debate begins, Nova will initiate the diversion. You'll have a small window to break through their firewall and access the core of their operation." Ethan adjusted his VR headset and took a deep breath. "And if it fails?" Sarah's expression was grave. "Then we lose everything." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have to. The weight of the moment was clear to both of them. He donned the headset and entered the virtual world once more. The stage for the debate was grand, set in a virtual city square with towering holograms of both candidates hovering above. Thousands of digital spectators had logged in to watch the final showdown between Ethan's Sentinel and Lena's Radiance. Their avatars stood at opposite ends of the stage, ready to face each other one last time before voters made their decision. "Welcome to the final presidential debate," The moderator's voice echoed across the virtual platform. Tonight, we'll hear from the two leading candidates, Ethan Cruz and Lena Ramos, as they outline their vision for the future of the country. Ethan glanced at Lena. She was calm, focused. The Codex would be watching closely, expecting to manipulate the outcome in Lena's favor as they had before. But tonight, they had no idea what was coming. As the debate began, Ethan delivered his opening remarks, speaking about the importance of integrity and leadership, about guiding the country through the challenges ahead. Lena followed with her own powerful vision of progress and innovation, her words striking all the right chords with the virtual audience. To the casual observer, it seemed like a typical political debate, but behind the scenes, Nova was already at work. The AI assistant activated the diversion, sending false data streams through the VR platform, creating subtle disruptions in the system. It was enough to draw the Codex's attention, forcing them to shift focus away from manipulating the debate. Ethan could feel the tension rise as he continued to speak, his voice steady but his mind racing. "Ethan, we're in." Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. "Nova's breached their firewall. You have less than 5 minutes to access their core systems." Ethan nodded imperceptibly, continuing to speak as though nothing was happening. But beneath the surface, he was guiding Nova's path deeper into the Codex's operation. The virtual stage around him flickered slightly, a sign that the Codex was struggling to maintain control over the system. Lena, too, was playing her part perfectly, her words measured and confident. She had no idea if they would succeed, but she was giving it everything she had. With each passing second, Nova fed Ethan critical data on the Codex's operations. They had access to everything now: at the manipulation of the simulations, the fabricated polling data, the algorithms that had been subtly rigging the election for weeks. It was a sprawling web of deceit, and they had just enough time to expose it all. "Almost there," Sarah whispered in Ethan's ear. "Just a little longer." Suddenly, the virtual arena began to shift. The Codex had noticed the breach. The digital environment around them started to destabilize, the once grand city square flickering and glitching as the Codex tried to regain control. Panic rippled through the virtual audience as avatars began to disappear, their connections severed by the growing chaos. "We're losing the platform." Sarah's voice was urgent now. "Ethan, you need to get the data out, now." Ethan's fingers moved swiftly across the virtual console Nova had generated for him, extracting the incriminating files and sending them to Sarah for public release. As the digital world around him collapsed, he kept his focus, knowing that this was their last chance to take down the Codex. "Got it," Sarah confirmed. "The data is secure. We're sending it out to every major news outlet as we speak." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, but there was no time to celebrate. The Codex wasn't done yet. In one final act of desperation, they unleashed a massive system-wide attack, flooding the platform with viruses and malware in an attempt to cover their tracks. "Get out of there, Ethan," Sarah shouted. "They're trying to wipe everything." Ethan disconnected from the VR platform just as the world around him collapsed into chaos. He ripped off the headset, gasping for air as he returned to the real world. Sarah was already on the phone, coordinating with cybersecurity teams to protect the evidence they had just uncovered. "It's over," she said, her voice steady now. "We've got them." "The Codex is finished." Ethan slumped back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. They had done it. The election was safe. The public would know the truth about the Codex's manipulations, and the voters would make their decision free from the hackers' influence. Lena called him later that night. "We did it," she said softly. "I don't know what happens next, but at least the election will be fair now." Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Yeah, we'll see how the people decide." The next morning, the news was everywhere. The Codex had been exposed, their plan to rig the election laid bare for the world to see. Both Ethan and Lena were hailed as heroes for uncovering the conspiracy and protecting the democratic process. Election day came and went, and the results were closer than anyone had expected. In the end, it didn't matter who won. What mattered was that the election had been saved, and the people had chosen their next leader on their own terms. As Ethan stood on the steps of the Capitol building, watching the sunrise on a new day, he knew that the future of democracy was secure for now. But the battle for truth and integrity would never truly be over, not in a world where the line between reality and the virtual was constantly shifting. And Ethan Cruz would be ready for whatever came next. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The night sky over the city was unusually clear, with the stars twinkling above like they were indifferent to the chaos brewing below. Ethan Cole sat in his dimly lit apartment, fingers dancing across the keyboard as his computer screen bathed his face in a cold, blue glow. He'd been at this for hours, eyes bloodshot and pulse racing, but he was close. Too close to turn back now. It started as just another late-night coding session, tinkering with a few back-end updates for the tech startup he worked at. Ethan wasn't particularly invested in the company or the upcoming election that had the nation glued to their screens. But that night, he stumbled upon something that sent a chill down his spine. At first, it was just a curious line of code embedded deep within the company's servers. The system they were working on was contracted by a private firm supposedly involved in improving voter turnout and data analysis for the election. Nothing suspicious on the surface, but this piece of code, it didn't belong. Ethan's experience as a programmer had taught him when something didn't feel right. This was one of those times. Why would voter data need this kind of encryption? He muttered to himself, a sinking feeling gnawed at him as he delved deeper, unraveling what looked like a hidden directive. As the minutes ticked by, he realized it wasn't just voter data. The system was interfacing with a neural network, one that could potentially manipulate human behavior through brainwave patterns. His mind raced. Holy! This is... no way. It couldn't be real, could it? Manipulating brainwaves. It sounded like something ripped straight out of a bad science fiction novel. But the more he dug, the more the pieces began to fit. The data showed how certain frequencies could be targeted at individuals to subtly push them toward making unconscious decisions. Decisions like, say, voting for a particular candidate. Suddenly, a warning flashed across his screen. Unauthorized access detected. He froze. Someone had noticed him poking around where he didn't belong. His heart thudded in his chest as the screen flashed red. A countdown timer signaling an impending system lockout. He frantically unplugged the Ethernet cable, severing the connection just in time. The silence that followed was suffocating. His phone buzzed on the desk. Ethan glanced at it, dreading what he might see. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he knew exactly who it was. He picked up the phone, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hello?" A cold, measured voice answered. "You should stop now, Mr. Cole, before you go too far." The call ended before he could respond. Ethan stared at the phone, mind racing. They knew. They were watching him. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined black SUVs pulling up outside, faceless agents dragging him away in the dead of night. He was sure he'd been marked, but the question was, what did they want to do about it? He needed answers, and he needed help. The next morning, after pacing his apartment for hours, he reached out to the only person he could trust, Lena. Lena was a brilliant hacker and an old friend. She worked in cybersecurity and had the kind of skills Ethan needed if he was going to make sense of what he'd uncovered. They hadn't spoken much lately, but this wasn't something he could handle alone. He dialed her number and hoped she'd pick up. After a few rings, she answered. "Ethan, haven't heard from you in a while. What's up?" Her voice was casual, like they'd just spoken the day before. She had no idea what he was about to drag her into. "I need your help," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Something's come up. It's serious." There was a pause. Lena wasn't the type to scare easily, but she could sense the tension in his voice. "All right, I'm listening." Later that day, Ethan met Lena at a small cafe tilde copyright downtown. They sat in the back corner, away from the windows. He explained everything of what he'd found, the hidden code, the brainwave manipulation technology, and the phone call. Lena listened intently, her face expressionless as she processed the information. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Brainwave manipulation? You sure about this, Ethan? This sounds insane. I know it does. But I saw the code. I saw what it was doing. They're using it to control people, Lena. To make them vote for whoever they want. This election is a complete sham. She sighed, glancing around the cafe tilde copyrights as if expecting someone to be listening in. And now they're after you. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I don't know how long I have before they make their move, but I need to get ahead of this. I need proof of something I can use to expose them. Lena tapped her fingers on the table, deep in thought. Finally, she leaned in closer, her voice low. I can help you. But we're going to have to be smart about this. If what you're saying is true, they won't hesitate to take you out to protect their operation. I know, Ethan said, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm in deep already. There's no turning back. Over the next few days, Ethan and Lena worked tirelessly to dig deeper into the conspiracy. Lena hacked into encrypted servers, pulling out files and documents that confirmed what Ethan had suspected. The brainwave technology was real, and it was being used to influence voters on a massive scale. The government, in collusion with several powerful corporations, had developed the technology in secret. Their candidate was a puppet, controlled by unseen forces. Ethan felt sick to his stomach. Democracy wasn't just broken, it had been stolen right out from under the people's noses. As they gathered more evidence, Ethan's paranoia grew. Every time he left his apartment, he felt like he was being watched. His phone calls were monitored, his emails flagged. Someone was tracking him, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. Ethan was asleep when the sound of breaking glass jolted him awake. He sat up, heart pounding. In the darkness, he could see the outline of a figure standing in the doorway. Without thinking, he grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the bed and swung wildly. The figure ducked, and before Ethan could react, he was tackled to the ground. A rough hand clamped over his mouth, silencing his screams. His eyes darted around the room in terror. Shut up, a voice hissed in his ear. Ethan thrashed, trying to break free, but the man was too strong. He felt cold steel press against his neck, a knife. His body went rigid. Move, and I'll cut you, the man growled. Ethan stopped struggling. His mind raced, searching for a way out. The man dragged him to his feet, forcing him to the window. Outside, he could see a black SUV idling by the curb, headlights off. We're going for a ride, the man said, his voice dripping with menace. Just as the man opened the window to haul Ethan out, there was a loud bang. The door burst open, and Lena stood there, holding a gun. She fired once, hitting the man in the shoulder. He screamed, dropping the knife and clutching his wound. Come on, Lena shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him toward the door. They ran, bolting down the stairs and out into the street. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching as it sped after them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they darted through alleyways, ducking into shadows and trying to lose their pursuers. Ethan's legs burned as he and Lena sprinted through the darkened streets, weaving between alleyways, barely ahead of the SUV roaring behind them. The screech of tires echoed off the buildings, and the headlights cast long, menacing shadows, reminding Ethan that they were only moments away from being caught. His mind raced, struggling to come up with a plan. But every escape route they tried seemed to lead to a dead end. Down here, Lena shouted, pulling him into a narrow alley that seemed impossibly tight for the SUV to follow. They ducked into the shadows, pressing themselves against the cold, damp brick walls, breathing heavily as the vehicle screeched to a halt just outside the alley's entrance. For a moment, silence hung in the air, save for their ragged breaths. Ethan listened, his pulse pounding in his ears, as two car doors slammed. The sound of footsteps approached, slow and methodical, the agents clearly confident that they had their prey cornered. "We need to move," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible, as he looked at Lena. She nodded, her eyes sharp with adrenaline. She peeked around the corner, her grip tightening on the gun she'd fired just moments earlier. Ethan had no idea where she'd gotten it, but right now, he was thankful she had. "There's a fire escape at the end of the alley," she said quietly. "If we can get up to the roof, we might have a chance." Ethan swallowed hard. "You think they'll follow?" Lena gave a grim smile. "They won't expect us to go up. They'll assume we're running to street level." They didn't have much time to debate it. The footsteps were getting closer. Ethan's heart was hammering in his chest as they made a break for it, darting to the end of the alley. The metal ladder of the fire escape loomed ahead, barely illuminated by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Lena grabbed the first rung and began climbing swiftly. Ethan followed, his muscles screaming in protest. They reached the roof just as the agents turned the corner into the alley. Ethan dared a glance down and saw them pointing, one of them barking orders into a radio. In a few minutes, backup would arrive, and they'd be surrounded. Lena didn't wait for him to catch his breath. She was already sprinting across the roof, looking for their next move. Ethan followed, his lungs burning. As they reached the edge of the building, Lena skidded to a halt and pointed across the gap to the next roof, only a few feet away. "We have to jump." Ethan's stomach lurched. "Are you serious? You got a better idea?" He didn't. Ethan took a deep breath, backed up a few steps, and ran. His feet pounded against the gravel-covered rooftop, and as he reached the edge, he pushed off as hard as he could. For a split second, he felt weightless, suspended in the air between buildings. Then his feet hit the opposite roof, and he rolled, barely managing to stay upright. Lena landed beside him a moment later, already moving again. "We need to get to a secure location. They'll be scanning the area soon." "Traffic cams, drones, everything." Ethan nodded, forcing his legs to keep up with her pace. They crossed two more buildings before Lena finally slowed, crouching behind a large vent. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed something, her fingers moving with precision and speed that made it clear she was no stranger to this kind of situation. "Got a safe house nearby," she said, barely glancing up. "We can regroup there." Ethan didn't ask questions. He trusted Lena. She'd just saved his life, and right now, that was all the assurance he needed. They spent the next half hour sneaking through back streets, avoiding cameras, and staying out of sight until they reached a small, unmarked building at the edge of the industrial district. Lena keyed in a code on the door, and they slipped inside. It was dark, musty, and sparsely furnished. She'd just the bare essentials. But it was safe, and for now, that was enough. Ethan collapsed onto an old couch, his chest heaving. "What the hell just happened?" "They're after you, Ethan." "That's what happened," Lena said flatly as she locked the door behind her. "You got too close. They can't afford to let you expose what they're doing." He rubbed his face, trying to process everything. "I thought I was just, I don't know, blowing the whistle. I didn't expect them to send people to kill me." "Well, now you know how far they're willing to go to keep this secret," Lena said. She moved to a small table, spreading out a map of the city. "We need a new plan. We have some evidence, but it's not enough. We need something bigger, something that can bring the whole system down." Ethan leaned forward, feeling the weight of the task settle heavily on his shoulders. "How do we do that?" "They've got the resources, the tech." Lena tapped the map. "I've been thinking, if we can get into their main server, the heart of the system where they control the brainwave technology, we can pull out everything. We can broadcast it to the public, leak it to the world." There'd been no denying it. Ethan frowned. "And where exactly is this server?" Lena looked at him, her expression grim. "It's in a government facility, high security." "We'll need help." Ethan's stomach knotted. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but breaking into a government building? That felt like suicide. We don't have a choice, Lena continued, as if reading his thoughts. If we don't stop them, this election will be rigged forever. The people will never know they've been manipulated. He knew she was right, and that terrified him. But what terrified him more was the idea of doing nothing. 2 days later, they met with a group known only as the Ghosts. Lena had made contact with them through one of her underground channels. They were a collective of hackers, activists, and tech-savvy individuals who had been quietly watching the election unfold, suspicious of its legitimacy. When Ethan and Lena laid out what they had discovered, the Ghosts agreed to help. The plan was simple in theory but dangerously complex in execution: infiltrate the government facility, access the central server, and extract the data that proved the brainwave manipulation conspiracy. Then, broadcast it to the world in real time, forcing the truth out into the open. Ethan spent the next few days preparing, both mentally and physically. He was no soldier, but he knew that he couldn't afford to fail. Lena drilled him on every possible contingency, running through the security protocols they'd need to bypass, the backup plans in case things went sideways. When the day of the operation finally arrived, Ethan felt a mix of dread and determination. There was no turning back. The facility was heavily fortified, just as they had expected. Ethan and Lena, along with a few members of the Ghosts, moved in under the cover of darkness, using every ounce of stealth and hacking skills they had to bypass the outer security. They moved like shadows, avoiding detection as they made their way to the server room. The tension in the air was palpable. Every step felt like it could be their last. But after what felt like an eternity, they reached the door to the server room. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as Lena worked on the lock, her fingers flying over the keypad. "Almost there," she whispered. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan froze, his mind racing. They were so close. They couldn't get caught now. The lock clicked open just as the guards rounded the corner. Lena shoved the door open, pulling Ethan inside before the guards could spot them. They were in. Ethan didn't waste a second. He rushed to the main terminal, plugging in the drive that the Ghosts had provided. His fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the complex encryption with the help of Lena's instructions. The files began downloading. Seconds felt like hours as the data trickled in. The tension was unbearable, but Ethan kept his focus. Finally, the download completed. "We got it," he whispered. Lena nodded, her face pale but determined. "Now let's get the hell out of here." The broadcast went live later that night, just hours before the election was set to begin. The truth was revealed to millions of people across the nation. The brainwave manipulation, the hidden code, the corporate control, it was all there for the world to see. The response was immediate. Protests erupted. People flooded the streets, demanding answers. The government scrambled to contain the chaos, but it was too late. The conspiracy had been exposed, and there was no going back. Ethan and Lena watched it unfold from their safe house, exhausted but victorious. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. "We did it," he said, barely able to believe it. Lena smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Yeah, but this is just the beginning. There's still a long way to go." Ethan knew she was right. The fight wasn't over. But for now, they had won a crucial battle. And that was enough.